On the frozen frontier, a 23-year-old woman runs for her life, clutching a tin box that holds the key to the region's most valuable resource, water rights worth killing for. Surrounded by armed traffickers in a blinding snowstorm, Alara Quinn faces certain death until a wounded Lakota warrior emerges from the white chaos, turning her execution into a brutal fight for survival. This is a story of power, betrayal, and an alliance forged in blood. Stay with me until the end. Hit that like button and comment your city so I can see how far this story travels. Let's begin. The wind cut like broken glass across Alara Quinn's face as she urged her mare forward through the snowdrift. Her fingers, numb inside worn leather gloves, clutched the reins with one hand and pressed a dented tin box against her chest with the other. The box wasn't large, maybe 8 inches across, but it felt heavy as sin and twice as damning. 3 days ago, her father had been alive. 3 days ago, she'd been helping him sort through land documents in their cabin near the edge of Prairie Valley, listening to him cough, that wet, rattling cough that had gotten worse through the winter. 3 days ago, she hadn't known that men would kill for what was inside this box. The mare stumbled, and Alara's heart jumped into her throat. She couldn't afford to lose the horse. Not out here, 20 miles from anywhere that mattered, with the temperature dropping and the sky the color of old bruises. The trail, if you could even call it that, wound through scrub pine and exposed rock, following the frozen Snake Creek toward the Territorial Claims Office in Garrison Falls. She had to reach Garrison Falls, had to file the claim before Crow's people figured out what she carried. Behind her, the sound she'd been dreading, hoofbeats. Alara twisted in the saddle, her breath coming sharp and fast. Through the swirling snow, she counted 4 riders, maybe 5. They weren't bothering to hide themselves anymore. Her mare was already exhausted. There would be no outrunning them. She scanned the landscape desperately. To her left, the ground dropped away into a rocky ravine. To her right, scrub brush and scattered boulders offered minimal cover. Ahead, the trail narrowed where it passed between 2 cliff faces, a natural choke point. The riders were closing fast. Alara made a choice. She yanked the mare's head toward the rocks, driving her off the trail. The horse resisted, eyes rolling white, but Alara dug her heels in hard. They crashed through brittle brush, and she threw herself from the saddle behind a boulder cluster, dragging the tin box with her. The mare bolted. "Damn it!" Alara hissed. She pressed her back against the frozen stone, her whole body shaking, from cold or fear. She couldn't tell anymore. She fumbled inside her coat, fingers finding the small revolver her father had given her on her 16th birthday. 6 shots. She'd fired it maybe a dozen times in her life, and never at anything that could shoot back. The hoofbeats slowed, then stopped. "Miss Quinn," the voice carried across the wind, smooth and almost polite. "There's no call for this to get ugly." Alara recognized that voice. Griggs Hale. She'd seen him twice before, once in Garrison Falls, once outside the general store in Willow Bend. Mid-40s, well-dressed for the frontier with cold eyes and colder hands. He worked for Victor Crow, though exactly what kind of work wasn't something people discussed in daylight. "My father's dead," Alara called out, her voice steadier than she felt. "The claim's mine by right. It's legal." A pause. Then Hale laughed, the sound carried away by the wind almost before it reached her. "Legal's a funny word out here, miss. Thing is, Mr. Crow's been working that land for near on 3 years. Your daddy had an understanding with him. My father had a deed and water rights, both registered and witnessed. About those water rights, that's what we need to discuss. See, there's been some confusion, some documents that maybe ain't quite as solid as you think. Mr. Crow, he's willing to be generous. $500 for the box and whatever papers you got. You can walk away, start fresh somewhere else. Montana, maybe. California." Alara's jaw clenched. $500. Her father had owned 1,200 acres of valley land with the only reliable water source for 50 miles in any direction. In a region where water meant the difference between a thriving town and a ghost town, those rights were worth a fortune. Crow didn't want to buy her out. He wanted to erase her. "I'm filing the claim," she said. "You want to contest it? Do it legal." Another pause. When Hale spoke again, the politeness had evaporated. "Boys, go get her." Alara heard them dismount, heard boots crunching through snow. She raised the revolver with both hands, trying to remember everything her father had taught her. Sight picture, breath control. Squeeze, don't pull. A shadow moved between the rocks to her left. She fired. The shot went wide. She saw the spark where the bullet hit stone, but the shadow jerked back. Men shouted. For a few seconds there was confusion, and Alara used it to scramble deeper into the rocks, the tin box banging against her ribs. "She's armed!" someone yelled. "No shit!" another voice growled. "Hale, this wasn't part of the deal. You said she was just some girl." "She is just some girl. Get her." More movement. Alara fired twice more, not really aiming, just trying to make them cautious. 4 shots left. She wedged herself into a gap between 2 boulders, making herself as small as possible. A hand grabbed her ankle. Alara screamed and kicked hard. Her boot connected with something, a face maybe, and she heard a satisfying crunch and a howl of pain. But then there were more hands dragging her out of the rocks, and the revolver was torn from her grip. They hauled her upright in the snow. 3 men, all of them rough-looking, dressed in mismatched coats and gun belts. One had a bloody nose and looked at her with pure murder in his eyes. "Bitch broke my nose," he snarled. "Settle down, Clay." Griggs Hale walked up, his boots crunching methodically. He wasn't even breathing hard. He looked at Alara the way someone might look at a horse that had kicked them, annoyed, but not particularly concerned. "Miss Quinn, you've made this harder than it needed to be." Alara tried to jerk free, but the men holding her tightened their grip. One of them, a lean man with a scar across his throat, picked up the tin box from where it had fallen in the snow. "Got it, Hale." "Good." Hale studied Alara for a moment. "You know what happens to women out here when they don't have protection? When they don't have family or money or sense?" Alara spat at him. He didn't even flinch, just pulled a handkerchief from his pocket and wiped his face, his expression never changing. "Clay, you and Pike take her to the camp. Keep her there until we figure out what to do with her. Scar, you're with me. We need to get these documents to Mr. Crow before anyone else sees them." "Wait." The man called Pike, who was holding Alara's left arm, shifted uncomfortably. "Hale, what are we supposed to do with her? I mean, long term." Hale looked at Pike like he'd asked what color the sky was. "Whatever needs doing. Use your imagination." Something cold and horrible settled in Alara's stomach. She'd heard stories. Every woman on the frontier had heard stories about girls who disappeared, about camps in the deep woods where men like Crow kept women the way some men kept livestock. "You can't," she said, and hated how small her voice sounded. "People know I'm traveling to Garrison Falls. They'll look for me. Will they?" Hale tilted his head. "Your father's dead. You got no siblings. Your mother passed years ago. Who exactly is going to come looking? The sheriff?" He smiled. "Sheriff Tate is a practical man. He understands how things work." He turned away, signaling to Scar. The 2 of them started toward their horses. "Move her," Clay said, his voice thick with anger and blood from his broken nose. "And if she tries anything else, I'm going to make sure she regrets it." They dragged Alara toward where the horses were tethered. She fought, kicked, twisted, tried to bite. But Clay backhanded her across the face hard enough that her vision went white for a second. When it cleared, she was on the ground, tasting blood, and Clay was standing over her with his hand on his gun belt. "Try that again," he said quietly. "Please." Pike grabbed her by the back of her coat and hauled her up. "Come on. Don't make this worse. Worse." As if there was a version of this that wasn't a nightmare. They were pushing her toward a horse when the first shot rang out. It didn't come from Alara or from any of Hale's men. It came from somewhere in the rocks above them, a sharp crack that echoed off the cliff faces. Scar dropped. Just dropped, like someone had cut his strings. He hit the snow face first and didn't move. For a heartbeat, everyone froze. Then Griggs Hale was moving, drawing his pistol, and diving behind a boulder. "Ambush! Find cover!" Another shot. One of the horses screamed and went down thrashing. The other horses panicked, pulling at their tethers. Clay and Pike dropped Alara and scattered. She hit the ground hard, her hands and knees sinking into snow and frozen mud. Her first instinct was to run, but she couldn't see where the shots were coming from, couldn't tell what direction was safe. A third shot clipped the boulder next to Hale's head, showering him with rock fragments. "Where the hell is he?" Clay shouted. He was crouched behind a fallen log, his pistol out, head swiveling. "Up in the rocks," Pike yelled back. "Has to be." Hale's face was tight with fury. "One shooter. It's one goddamn shooter. Flank him. Go!" Clay and Pike exchanged a look. neither one eager to be the first to move. Now! Hale snarled. They broke from cover, moving low and fast toward opposite sides of the rock formation. Alara took the opportunity to scramble toward the nearest boulder, her heart hammering so hard she thought it might crack a rib. Another shot. Pike went down, clutching his leg and screaming. Clay stopped dead, looking back at his wounded companion, then up at the rocks. Even from where she was hiding, Alara could see the calculation on his face. He turned and ran, not toward the shooter, but away, toward where the horses were tied. "Coward!" Hale hissed. He fired 3 shots into the rocks, but Alara couldn't tell if he hit anything. The return fire was immediate and precise. A bullet punched through the boulder Hale was using for cover, missing him by inches. Hale's expression changed. This wasn't some amateur taking pot shots. This was someone who knew exactly what they were doing. "Who are you?" Hale shouted. "This isn't your fight." No answer, just the wind and Pike's whimpering. Hale tried a different approach. "You working for the girl? She hire you. Whatever she's paying, Crow'll double it." For a long moment, there was only silence. Then a voice, deep and rough, speaking English, but with an accent Alara couldn't quite place. "She doesn't need to pay me to dislike traffickers." Hale's face went dark. "You don't know what you're talking about. I know exactly what I'm talking about. I've seen your camps, seen what you do." Hale fired again, wild shots that didn't come close. He was rattled now. Alara could see it in the jerky way he moved, the way his eyes kept darting around looking for an escape route. "This is business," Hale said. "Legal business. You're interfering with—" "Throw down your weapons and ride out. Tell Crow the girl is under protection now." Hale actually laughed, a harsh, bitter sound. "Protection? From who? You're one man." "One is enough." Another shot, and this one took Hale's hat clean off his head. The hat spun through the air and landed in the snow 10 feet away. The message was clear. The next one wouldn't miss. Hale stared at where his hat had fallen. His hand was shaking now, Alara noticed. Not much, but enough. "This isn't over," he said, loudly enough to carry. "Crow doesn't forget. Whoever you are, you just made a powerful enemy. I've had powerful enemies before. I'm still here. They aren't." Hale looked at Pike, who was still on the ground holding his bleeding leg, looked at Scar's body, looked at Clay, who was already mounted and halfway to the horizon. He made his choice. Hale broke from cover and ran for his horse. He moved fast, staying low, and the shooter let him go. Within seconds, Hale was mounted and spurring his horse after Clay, leaving Pike and Scar behind. Pike stared after them, disbelief and pain warring on his face. "Hale, you bastard! Hale!" But Hale was already gone, disappeared into the swirling snow. Alara stayed frozen behind her boulder, afraid to move, afraid to breathe. The shooter hadn't revealed himself yet. For all she knew, saving her wasn't the plan. Maybe he just didn't like Hale's crew. "You can come out." The voice came from above and to the left, up in the rocks. "I'm not going to hurt you." Alara didn't move. "The one with the leg wound isn't going anywhere, and the one who ran is probably halfway to the next county by now. But there'll be more coming. You need to move." Slowly, Alara stood up. Her legs felt like water. She looked up toward where the voice had come from, squinting against the snow. A figure emerged from the rocks. Tall, broad-shouldered, moving with an economical grace despite an obvious limp. As he descended, picking his way carefully down the slope, Alara got her first clear look at him. Lakota, or she thought so. She'd seen tribal members in Garrison Falls, but never really talked to any. Long, dark hair tied back, strong features, wearing a mix of traditional and settler clothing that looked both practical and deliberate. He carried a rifle, a Winchester, well maintained, and had a knife at his belt. There was blood on his shirt, a lot of it. He reached the bottom of the slope and stood about 20 feet from her, making no move to come closer. His eyes were dark and unreadable, taking in everything, her torn coat, her bruised face, the way she was swaying on her feet. "You're hurt," Alara said, because it was the first thing that came to her mind. He glanced down at the blood on his shirt as if he'd forgotten about it. "Old wound, reopened." "How old?" 3 days. That didn't seem old to Alara, but she wasn't about to argue with the man who'd just saved her life. She looked past him to where Pike was still on the ground, whimpering and pressing both hands against his thigh. "What about him?" The man, the warrior, Alara supposed, followed her gaze. He'll live if he's smart. If he follows his friends, he'll probably bleed out before he reaches wherever they're going. He said it without emotion, just stating facts. Pike heard him. Please, I need help. You need to answer some questions, the man said, walking over to him. He knelt beside Pike, ignoring the man's flinch. Where's Crow's main camp? I don't know what you're talking about. The warrior pressed a hand against Pike's wounded leg. Pike screamed. The camp, where you take the women, where is it? North, Pike gasped out. 15 miles north, up in the timber country, near the old mill. That's all I know, I swear. How many men? I don't know, 20, maybe. It changes. The warrior stood up. He pulled a strip of cloth from his coat pocket and tossed it to Pike. Tie that around your leg. Tight. Then start walking. If I see you again, I won't aim for your leg. He turned back to Alara, who was still standing in the same spot, trying to process everything that had just happened. You're going to Garrison Falls, he said. It wasn't a question. I have to file a claim. For my father's land. He nodded slowly, as if she'd just confirmed something he already knew. That box those men took, it's important? Alara's heart sank. In all the chaos, she'd forgotten. The tin box was gone. Hale had it. The warrior saw her expression. Don't worry. The man who ran, the one with the scar, he's dead. I hit him in the neck. He bled out before he made it to his horse. Your box is in his saddlebag. He walked over to where Scar's body lay in the snow, bent down, and after a moment of searching, stood up holding the dented tin box. He carried it back to Alara and held it out. She took it with trembling hands, clutching it against her chest. Thank you. I don't even know your name. Raven Wolf. I'm Alara. Alara Quinn. I know. That surprised her. How do you... Your father used to trade at Fort Bridger. I met him twice. He talked about you. Raven Wolf's expression softened just slightly. I'm sorry for your loss. Alara felt something break loose inside her chest, all the fear and grief she'd been holding back for 3 days. She bit down hard on the inside of her cheek, using the pain to keep herself steady. She couldn't afford to fall apart. Not now. We need to move, Raven Wolf said. Hale will go back to Crow. They'll send more men, and next time there'll be too many for me to handle alone. Where do we go? He looked up at the darkening sky, calculating. There's a trapper's cabin about 8 miles east. We can reach it before full dark if we move now. You can rest there, and we'll figure out the next step. I need to get to Garrison Falls. I have to file the claim before Crow files a counterclaim or has the records destroyed or bribes the land office clerk. I know. Raven Wolf met her eyes. But if you're dead, none of that matters. One night. Then we'll get you to Garrison Falls. Alara wanted to argue, but she was cold and exhausted, and her face hurt where Clay had hit her. She looked around at the carnage, Scar's body, Pike crawling painfully toward a horse, the blood in the snow. Why are you helping me? She asked. Raven Wolf was quiet for a moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully neutral. Let's say I have my own reasons for wanting to see Crow's operation shut down. Your land claim might be the lever we need to do that. We? There are others who want Crow stopped. People he's hurt. People he's stolen from. He paused. People he's enslaved. The word hung in the cold air between them. Alara thought about the stories she'd heard, the whispers in town that people shut down whenever she got close. She thought about Hale's expression when he'd ordered his men to take her to the camp, whatever needs doing. The women, she said quietly, the ones who disappear. He's really... Yes. One word, but it contained volumes. Alara looked down at the tin box in her hands. Inside were her father's land deed, the water rights documentation, and a letter he'd written to her the day before he died. She'd read it once, and once had been enough. He'd known they were coming for him, known what the land was worth and what men like Crow would do to get it. He told her to run, to take the box and run as far as she could and never look back. She hadn't run, wouldn't run. Okay, she said, we go to the cabin, but tomorrow we ride for Garrison Falls, and we don't stop until I file this claim. Raven Wolf nodded. Tomorrow. He whistled sharply, and a moment later a horse emerged from the rocks, a sturdy paint gelding. Can you ride? My horse ran off. You'll ride with me then? It's not far. He mounted with the fluid ease of someone who'd spent most of his life on horseback, then reached down to help her up. Alara hesitated for just a second. She'd never been this close to a Lakota warrior before, never really been close to any native person. But then she took his hand and let him pull her up behind him. She had to wrap her arms around his waist to stay on. She could feel the warmth of him through his coat, could feel the steady rise and fall of his breathing, could also feel the wet warmth of blood where his wound had reopened. "You need to take care of that," she said. "I will, at the cabin." He urged the horse forward, and they started east, away from the trail, away from the bodies in the snow. Alara looked back once and saw Pike still trying to reach a horse, leaving a trail of red behind him. She felt something, not pity exactly, but a kind of sick awareness that this was what the frontier really looked like. Not the clean stories people told, not the heroic narratives, just blood and snow and desperate people doing terrible things to survive. They rode in silence as the light failed and the temperature dropped. Alara's fingers were numb, even clutching the tin box. She could feel Raven Wolf starting to slump slightly in the saddle, his breathing more labored. "How much farther?" she asked. 2 miles, maybe 3. "You're not going to make it 3 miles. I'll make it." Stubborn, Alara thought. But then she was hardly one to talk. The cabin appeared out of the gathering darkness like something from a fever dream. Small, half buried in a snowdrift, listing slightly to one side. But there was a lean-to for the horse and a chimney that suggested a stove inside. Raven Wolf dismounted with visible effort, staggering slightly when his feet hit the ground. Alara slid down after him, her own legs barely holding her weight. "Inside," he said. "I'll tend the horse." "You can barely stand. I'll tend the horse. You get inside and sit down before you fall down." He looked like he wanted to argue, but another wave of pain crossed his face, and he nodded. "There's a lamp just inside the door, matches on the shelf." The cabin was freezing and smelled of old smoke and mildew, but it had a stove and a pile of firewood and 2 narrow bunks built into the walls. Alara got a lamp lit, then went back outside to help Raven Wolf with the horse. Together, neither of them really in any condition to be doing this, they got the gelding unsaddled and settled in the lean-to with a nosebag of grain from the saddlebags. By the time they stumbled back into the cabin, Alara was shaking so hard her teeth chattered. She got the stove going while Raven Wolf collapsed onto one of the bunks. Once there was heat and light, she turned to look at him properly. He'd gone gray under his skin, and fresh blood was soaking through his shirt. "Let me see," Alara said. "It's fine." "You're bleeding through your shirt. It's not fine. Let me see." He studied her for a moment, then started unbuttoning his shirt with clumsy fingers. Alara helped him, trying not to think too hard about the fact that she was undressing a strange man in a cabin in the middle of nowhere. The wound was a knife wound, she saw, a long slash across his ribs on the left side. Someone had stitched it, but the stitches had torn open, probably during the fight or the ride. It needed to be cleaned and restitched, and she had no idea how to do either of those things. "There's a medical kit in my saddlebag," Raven Wolf said, his voice tight. "Needle and thread, whiskey." Alara found the kit and brought it back to the bunk. The needle looked terrifying. The thread looked worse. "I don't know how to do this," she admitted. "I'll talk you through it, but first, clean it. Use the whiskey." Alara poured whiskey over the wound. Raven Wolf hissed between his teeth, but didn't pull away. Up close, she could see scars, lots of them, old and new, covering his torso like a map of violence. "What happened to you?" she asked quietly. 3 days ago, I was scouting one of Crow's camps. They caught me. I fought my way out." He paused. This was a going-away present from one of his lieutenants. "And you came after me anyway, even injured." "I was already following you. You were just too focused on running to notice." "Why?" He met her eyes. "Because when your father died, I knew Crow would make a move for the land. Knew you'd be alone. Figured you'd need help." "You didn't even know me." "I knew your father. That was enough." Alara threaded the needle with shaking hands. "This is going to hurt." "Everything hurts. Just do it." She started stitching, trying to copy what she'd seen done with torn fabric, except this was skin and it was horrible, and Raven Wolf's breathing went harsh and rapid, but he didn't make a sound. After the 4th stitch, Alara had to stop, bile rising in her throat. "Keep going," Raven Wolf said. "You're doing fine." "I'm not doing fine. I'm butchering you." "Better than bleeding out." She finished the stitching somehow, her hands slick with blood and whiskey. When it was done, she sat back, feeling dizzy and sick. Raven Wolf looked down at her work. Not bad for your first time. That's a lie. It'll hold. That's what matters. He eased himself back onto the bunk. His face sheened with sweat despite the cold. Get some rest. We ride at first light. Elara looked at the other bunk, then at the tin box still clutched in her hand. She opened it, needing to see that everything was still there. The deed was there, the water rights documentation, and underneath them, her father's letter. She pulled it out, her hands leaving small bloodstains on the paper. She'd read it once, but she read it again now in the lamplight, her father's familiar handwriting swimming in her vision. Elara, if you're reading this, then I'm gone and you're in danger. I'm sorry. I thought I had more time, thought I could protect you from all this. The land is valuable, more valuable than you know. The water rights give you control of the only reliable water source for 50 miles. Crow knows this. He's been trying to buy me out for 2 years. And when I wouldn't sell, he tried intimidation. Threats. I thought I could handle it. I was wrong. There's something else you need to know. The land borders sacred territory, Lakota land that was supposed to be protected by treaty. Crow's been using his operations to push into that territory, to mine and log and take what isn't his. Some of the tribal leaders have been trying to stop him, but they don't have legal standing. You do. If you can file the claim and hold the land, you can cut off Crow's water supply. Without water, his operations dry up. Without his operations, he loses his power. But Elara, you need to be smart about this. Crow isn't just a land baron. He's built an empire on suffering. He traffics women, enslaves them, uses them until they break, and then discards them. He controls half the law enforcement in the territory through bribery and fear. You can't fight him alone. Find the Lakota elder called Standing Bear. He knew my father, knew our family before the settlers came in force. Tell him what happened. Tell him I sent you. He'll help if he can. And Elara, if it gets too dangerous, if you think you can't win, then run. Take the money I left in the cabin, under the loose floorboard by the stove, and go east. Start over. Live. Don't die for land. Don't die for my mistakes. I love you. I'm sorry I won't be there to see the woman you become. Dad. Elara folded the letter carefully and put it back in the box. Then she closed the lid and set the box on the floor next to her bunk. Your father was a good man, Raven Wolf said quietly from the other bunk. She'd thought he was asleep. You knew him? Not well, but I knew he stood up to Crow when most settlers wouldn't. Knew he believed the treaties should be honored. A pause. There aren't many like him. He told me to run. But you didn't. No. Why not? Elara thought about that. Because running doesn't stop men like Crow. It just means he wins and moves on to the next person, the next woman. She looked over at Raven Wolf. You said there are others who want him stopped. Who are they? Tribal council members, some settlers whose families he's destroyed, a few law enforcement people who aren't on his payroll. He shifted, trying to find a position that didn't hurt. But we've never had leverage. Crow's too well connected, too wealthy. Every time we get close to exposing him, evidence disappears or witnesses recant, or accidents happen. And you think my land claim changes that? I think your land claim gives us a legal wedge. If you file it, if it's recognized, then Crow can't legally access the water. His mining operations shut down. His timber operations shut down. Everything that funds his trafficking network, gone. But only if I can file the claim and keep it filed. If I can survive long enough for it to matter. Yes. Elara lay back on the bunk, staring up at the dark ceiling. Outside, the wind howled and snow scratched against the windows. Somewhere out there, Hale was riding back to Crow with news of what had happened. Somewhere out there, women were being held in camps, their lives reduced to property. Somewhere out there was a fight worth having. Tell me about Standing Bear, Elara said. Raven Wolf was quiet for so long she thought he'd fallen asleep. Then, he's my grandfather, my mother's father. He's been fighting Crow's encroachment for 5 years, using every legal avenue available, but the treaties aren't worth the paper they're printed on when there's money involved. Your grandfather. Then you're not just helping me because of my father. No. I'm helping you because if we can stop Crow's operations, we can stop the push into treaty land. We can protect what's left of our territory." He paused. "And because 3 months ago, Crow's men took my sister." The words fell into the darkness like stones into a well. Alara sat up. "Is she—" "I don't know. I've been tracking the camps, looking for her. I found 2, freed the women there, but she wasn't among them. There are more camps, at least 3 that I know of." "I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Help me burn his empire to the ground." It wasn't a request. It was an invitation. Alara thought about her father's letter, about the choice he'd given her, fight or run. She'd already made her choice. Now she just had to live long enough to see it through. "Okay," she said. "Tomorrow we ride to Garrison Falls. I file the claim. Then we find your sister and anyone else Crow's taken, and we end this." Raven Wolf turned his head to look at her, and even in the dim lamplight, she could see something shift in his expression. Not quite hope, too weathered for that, but something close. "Get some sleep," he said. "We'll need it." Alara lay back down, but sleep felt impossible. Her mind raced, running through everything that had happened, everything that could still go wrong. She must have dozed off eventually because she woke to gray dawn light filtering through the grimy windows and the sound of Ravenwolf moving around the cabin. He was dressed and packing his saddlebag, moving stiffly but upright. "How are you feeling?" Alara asked. "Like I got stabbed and then rode 8 miles. How are you feeling?" "Like I got beaten and almost kidnapped and then stitched up a stranger in a freezing cabin." "So we're both doing great." It surprised a laugh out of her, short and sharp. Ravenwolf smiled slightly, and Alara realized it was the first time she'd seen anything other than grim determination on his face. They ate a cold breakfast of jerky and hardtack from Ravenwolf's supplies, then got the horse ready. The gelding seemed annoyed to be leaving the relative warmth of the lean-to, but he tolerated being saddled. The sky was overcast, heavy with the promise of more snow. Ravenwolf studied it with a frown. "We should make Garrison Falls by afternoon if the weather holds and we don't run into trouble." "What are the chances we don't run into trouble?" "Low." They mounted up, Alara behind Ravenwolf again, and started west. The morning was bitter cold, the kind of cold that worked its way through every layer of clothing and settled into your bones. Alara's hands were numb within an hour, even clutching the tin box inside her coat. They'd been riding for maybe 3 hours when Ravenwolf suddenly pulled the horse to a stop. "What is it?" Alara asked. He was staring ahead, his whole body tense. "Riders! Coming fast!" Alara couldn't see anything yet, but she trusted his instincts. "How many?" 6. Maybe 7. Too many to fight. They both knew it. "There." Ravenwolf pointed to a stand of dense timber off to the left. "We can lose them in the trees if we move now." He urged the gelding forward, and they crashed into the timber just as the riders came into view around a bend in the trail. Alara caught a glimpse of them, men on horseback, moving with purpose, before the trees swallowed her and Ravenwolf completely. They pushed deeper into the timber, the horse picking its way through underbrush and deadfall. Behind them, Alara could hear shouting, the sound of pursuit. "They saw us," she said. "I know. Hold on." Ravenwolf pushed the gelding harder, weaving through the trees with reckless speed. Low branches whipped past, and Alara ducked, pressing herself against Ravenwolf's back. The tin box dug into her ribs. A gunshot cracked through the forest. The bullet hit a tree trunk 2 feet from Alara's head, sending splinters flying. "They're shooting," she said, her voice high and tight. "I noticed." Another shot, this one closer. Ahead, the timber opened up into a clearing with a frozen stream cutting through the middle. Ravenwolf reined the horse to a sliding stop at the edge. "We can't outrun them carrying double," he said. "Not with this horse." "So what do we do?" He looked at her, his expression grim. "You're going to have to trust me." Before Alara could ask what that meant, he swung down from the saddle and pulled her down after him. He grabbed the tin box from her hands and stuffed it into his saddlebag, then slapped the gelding hard on the rump. The horse bolted across the clearing, disappearing into the trees on the far side. "What are you doing?" Alara demanded. "Leading them away from us." He grabbed her hand and pulled her toward the stream. "Stay low and quiet." They scrambled down the bank and ducked under the overhang where ice had formed a kind of natural shelter. It was barely big enough for both of them, and they had to press close together, Alara's back against the frozen earth, Ravenwolf's body shielding her from view. His breathing was labored. The ride had reopened his wound again. She could feel fresh blood soaking through his shirt against her arm. The riders burst into the clearing moments later. 7 of them, just as Raven Wolf had estimated. They pulled up, looking around, their horses stamping and snorting. "Where'd they go?" one demanded. "Tracks lead across the stream," another said, pointing. "They're making for the far timber." "Could be a trick," a third voice, Hale's voice, cut in. "Spread out, search the area." Alara's heart hammered against her ribs. She could hear the men dismounting, boots crunching through snow and frozen brush. Someone was coming down the bank, getting closer to where she and Raven Wolf were hidden. Raven Wolf's hand moved slowly to the knife at his belt. He caught Alara's eyes and mouthed one word. "Still." The boots stopped right above them. Alara could see the man's shadow on the ice, could hear his breathing. He was looking around, scanning. A long moment. Then the man hawked and spat, and Alara heard him start to climb back up the bank. "Nothing here, Hale." "Keep looking. They couldn't have gotten far." More searching, more boots crunching around. Alara counted seconds in her head, each one feeling like an hour. Finally, "Hale, I got fresh tracks leading into the far timber. Horse tracks." A pause. Then Hale. "Mount up. Let's run these bastards down." The riders thundered across the clearing and disappeared into the trees. The sound of hoofbeats faded gradually until there was only the wind and the creak of frozen branches. Raven Wolf waited a full minute before moving. When he finally eased himself out from under the overhang, he moved like an old man, his face gray with pain. Alara crawled out after him. "Your wound. I know." He pressed a hand against his side. His fingers came away bloody. "We need to keep moving. They'll figure out the horses alone eventually and double back. You can barely walk." "I can walk well enough. Come on." They climbed out of the stream bed and started east, moving as quickly as Raven Wolf could manage. He was slowing down, Alara noticed with growing alarm. Every few minutes, he had to stop and lean against a tree, his breathing harsh. After the third stop, Alara made a decision. "We need to find shelter. You need to rest." "No time. There's no point reaching Garrison Falls if you bleed to death on the way. Look at yourself." He looked down at his side where blood was now visibly seeping through his coat. For a moment she thought he'd argue, but then he nodded. "There's a settler's cabin about a mile east. Abandoned. We can hole up there." They made it to the cabin in 40 agonizing minutes, Raven Wolf leaning heavily on Alara for the last quarter mile. The cabin was in rough shape. Half the roof caved in, one wall collapsed. But there was one room that still had a ceiling and 4 walls. Alara got Raven Wolf inside and eased him down onto the floor. He was shaking now, his skin clammy. "Infection," he said through chattering teeth, "setting in faster than I thought." "What do I do?" "Fire. Need to cauterize it." Alara stared at him. "You want me to—" "Heat a knife blade, press it against the wound. It'll stop the bleeding, kill some of the infection." He met her eyes. "There's no other option out here." Her hands were shaking as she gathered broken boards and got a fire started. She put Raven Wolf's knife blade directly into the flames and watched it heat. "Tell me about your sister," she said, needing something to focus on besides what she was about to do. "Ayita." Raven Wolf's voice was distant. "Her name means first to dance. She loved to dance, would dance to anything, drumming, singing, even just the sound of the wind if the mood took her." "How old is she?" 19. Just 19. The knife blade was glowing red now. Alara pulled it from the fire, her stomach turning. "I'm sorry," she said. "This is going to— just do it." She pressed the hot blade against his wound. Raven Wolf's scream tore through the cabin, and then he passed out. The smell of burning flesh made Alara gag, but she kept the blade pressed against the wound until the sizzling stopped, and she was sure the bleeding had slowed. When she finally pulled the knife away, her hands were shaking so badly she nearly dropped it. Raven Wolf lay unconscious on the floor, his breathing shallow but steady. Alara tore strips from her underskirt and wrapped them around his torso, binding the cauterized wound as tightly as she dared. Then she sat back against the wall, hugging her knees to her chest, and tried not to think about what would happen if he didn't wake up. She was alone in a half-collapsed cabin in the middle of nowhere, with no horse, no supplies, and no idea how to get to Garrison Falls on her own. The tin box with her father's documents was in a saddlebag on a gelding that had bolted across a frozen stream with 7 armed men chasing it. Everything was falling apart. Alara pressed the heels of her hands against her eyes and forced herself to breathe. Panic wouldn't help. Panic would just get her killed. She needed to think. Needed to make a plan. First, keep Raven Wolf alive. Without him, she had no chance of finding Standing Bear or locating Crow's camps or doing anything except dying slowly in the wilderness. Second, retrieve the tin box. The claim meant nothing if the documents were lost. Third, get to Garrison Falls and file the claim before Crow's people either destroyed the records or filed a fraudulent counterclaim. It all sounded impossible when she laid it out like that. Outside, the light was fading. Snow had started falling again, thick flakes that would cover any tracks they'd left. That was good. It meant Hale's men would have a harder time finding them, but it also meant the temperature was dropping fast, and this cabin had more holes than walls. Alara fed more broken boards into the fire, trying to build up enough heat to last through the night. She found an old blanket in the corner, moth-eaten and filthy, but better than nothing, and draped it over Raven Wolf. Then she sat down to wait. Raven Wolf didn't wake up that night, or the next morning. By midday, Alara was seriously considering the possibility that he might never wake up, and she'd have to leave him here and try to make it to Garrison Falls alone. The thought made her chest tight with something that wasn't quite fear and wasn't quite guilt. She'd known him for less than 2 days. She shouldn't feel this responsible for him. But he'd saved her life twice now, and she'd burned his wound shut with a knife, and somehow that created a debt she couldn't quite calculate. She was rationing the last of the jerky from her coat pocket when his eyes finally opened. How long? His voice was rough, barely more than a whisper. Almost a full day. Alara crawled over to him. How do you feel? Like something died inside me and is trying to claw its way out. That's probably the infection. He tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a groan. Did it work? The cauterization? The bleeding stopped. I don't know about the infection. Raven Wolf closed his eyes for a moment, then opened them again. We need to move. Can't stay here. Can't even sit up. Give me an hour. I'll sit up. It took him 3 hours, but he did eventually manage to get upright, leaning heavily against the wall. His face was gray and sheened with sweat, but his eyes were clearer than they'd been. Alara gave him water from her canteen and the last of the jerky. He chewed slowly, mechanically, like eating was just another task to get through. The horse, he said finally. Did you see which way it went? East into the timber. Your saddlebags are still on it. Including the tin box. Yes. He was quiet for a moment, thinking. The gelding's trained to come when I whistle. If he's within a mile or two, he'll find me. If he's farther than that, he trailed off. We track him, Alara finished. Or we give up on the documents and try to reach Garrison Falls to explain what happened. Explain to who? The land office clerk who's probably on Crow's payroll? The sheriff who turns a blind eye to trafficking? Raven Wolf shook his head. Without those documents, you have no proof. It's your word against Crow's, and Crow owns half the town. So we tracked the horse. We tracked the horse. It took another hour before Raven Wolf could stand without immediately falling over. By then, it was mid-afternoon and the light was already starting to fail. They couldn't afford to wait until morning. Every hour they delayed was another hour for Crow to consolidate his position. They left the cabin and headed east, following the general direction the gelding had bolted. The snow had covered most of the tracks, but Raven Wolf seemed to be navigating by instinct and memory rather than visible trail. He moved slowly, one hand pressed against his wounded side, stopping frequently to catch his breath. Alara stayed close, ready to catch him if he fell. After about a mile, he stopped and put 2 fingers to his lips, producing a sharp, piercing whistle that echoed through the trees. They waited. Nothing. He whistled again, longer this time. Still nothing. They kept walking. Every few hundred yards, Raven Wolf would stop and whistle. The third time he did it, Alara heard something, a distant whinny, faint but unmistakable. There, she said, pointing northeast. They changed direction, pushing through underbrush and deadfall. The whinny came again, closer now. And then Alara saw him. The paint gelding, standing in a small clearing, still fully saddled, cropping at frozen grass beneath the snow. Relief hit her so hard she almost laughed. Raven Wolf whistled once more, and the horse's head came up. He trotted over, snorting and tossing his head like he was annoyed at having been left alone for so long. "Good boy," Raven Wolf murmured, running a hand down the horse's neck. "Good boy." Alara went straight for the saddlebags. Her hands were shaking as she opened them, digging through supplies until her fingers closed on the familiar shape of the tin box. It was still there, still locked, still intact. She pulled it out and clutched it to her chest, feeling something tight in her lungs finally ease. "We got it," she said. "We actually got it." Raven Wolf was leaning against the horse, looking like he might pass out again. "Good. Now we just need to get to Garrison Falls without dying. You think you can ride?" "I don't think I have a choice." Getting him into the saddle was an ordeal that left both of them sweating despite the cold. Alara climbed up behind him, and they started west again, moving at a careful walk. The sun was setting when they finally emerged from the timber onto a proper road. In the distance, Alara could see smoke rising from chimneys, Garrison Falls, maybe 3 miles ahead. "We're going to make it," she said, more to herself than to Raven Wolf. "Don't say that. You'll jinx us." But they did make it, riding into Garrison Falls just as full dark settled over the town. It was a rough frontier settlement, maybe 200 people, built around a central square with a land office, a general store, a saloon, and a sheriff's office that looked more like a shed with a badge. Raven Wolf directed them to a boarding house on the edge of town, run by a widow named Mrs. Chen, who asked no questions when Alara paid for 2 rooms with coins from her father's emergency stash. "Land office opens at 8, Mrs. Chen said, eyeing Raven Wolf's blood-stained shirt with professional disinterest. "You'll want the clerk, Mr. Pettigrew. He's the one who handles claims." "Is he honest?" Alara asked. Mrs. Chen snorted. "He's alive, which in this town means he's made accommodations, but he follows the letter of the law, mostly because he's too scared not to. File your claim early, file it proper, and he'll process it. Whether Crow contests it after, that's another matter." Alara got Raven Wolf settled in his room, then retreated to her own and collapsed onto the narrow bed. She should eat something, should plan for tomorrow, should do 100 things. Instead, she fell asleep still holding the tin box. She woke to someone pounding on her door. Miss Quinn, you need to wake up." Alara jerked upright, disoriented. Pale dawn light was filtering through the window. The pounding continued. She stumbled to the door and cracked it open. Mrs. Chen stood in the hallway, her face tight with worry. "What is it?" "Men came this morning, 4 of them, looking for a young woman traveling alone. I told them I hadn't seen anyone matching that description, but they're watching the house, front and back." Alara's blood went cold. "How long ago?" 20 minutes. I came as soon as I saw them settle in." "Is there another way out?" "Cellar door leads to an alley, but if they're watching properly, they'll see you." Alara turned and grabbed the tin box from the bed. "I need to get to the land office. It doesn't open for another 2 hours. Then I'll wait outside until it does." She crossed the hall and knocked on Raven Wolf's door. No answer. She knocked harder, then tried the handle. The door swung open. The room was empty. The bed hadn't been slept in. The window was open, curtains moving in the cold breeze. "Where did he go?" Alara demanded. Mrs. Chen looked past her into the room. "I don't know. I didn't see him leave." Alara felt a spike of panic, then forced it down. Raven Wolf could take care of himself. Right now she needed to focus on filing the claim. "The cellar," she said. "Show me." Mrs. Chen led her downstairs and through a narrow storage room to a door set into the floor. Alara climbed down a ladder into a dirt floor cellar that smelled of potatoes and mildew, then crossed to where morning light leaked through a slanted door. She pushed it open carefully, peering out into an alley. Empty, as far as she could see. "Be careful," Mrs. Chen whispered from above. Alara climbed out, clutching the tin box, and started toward the main square. She kept to the alleys and backways, trying to stay out of sight. Once, she saw 2 men loitering near the general store and had to backtrack and take a longer route. The land office was a small wooden building with a false front that made it look bigger than it was. The door was still locked when Alara reached it, the windows dark. She settled in to wait, pressing herself into the recessed doorway, trying to look inconspicuous. The sun climbed higher. People started moving through the square, miners heading to work, shopkeepers opening their stores, A woman with 2 children making her way to the general store. Normal life. As if there weren't armed men hunting her. As if her entire future didn't hinge on the next few hours. At 7:30, a thin man in a suit and spectacles approached the land office. He was carrying a leather satchel and looked irritated about being awake this early. "Mr. Pettigrew?" Alara said, stepping out from the doorway. He jumped, nearly dropping his satchel. "Good grief. You trying to give me a heart attack?" "I need to file a land claim as soon as you open." Pettigrew looked her over, her torn coat, her bruised face, the desperate way she was clutching the tin box. His expression shifted from irritation to wariness. "Office opens at 8. Come back then." "Please, it's urgent." "Everything's urgent in Garrison Falls, miss. 8 o'clock. He unlocked the door and slipped inside, closing it firmly in her face. Alara stood there, fighting the urge to pound on the door and scream. Half an hour. She just needed to wait half an hour. Behind her, someone cleared their throat. Alara spun around. A man stood at the edge of the square, watching her. Not one of the men she'd seen earlier, but his posture, hands loose at his sides, weight balanced, marked him as trouble. "Miss Quinn," he said, his voice carrying across the empty space. "Mr. Crow would like a word." "Tell Mr. Crow I'm busy." I'm afraid that wasn't a request. 2 more men emerged from the alley to Alara's left. Another appeared from the direction of the general store. They were spreading out, boxing her in. Alara backed up until she was pressed against the land office door. Her hand went to her coat pocket, but her revolver was gone. Lost somewhere during the fight, or the ride. She couldn't remember. "You're making this harder than it needs to be," the first man said. "Just come with us. We'll sort this out civilized." "Like you sorted out my father?" Something flickered in the man's expression. Not quite guilt. More like acknowledgement. "Your father made his choices. Now you need to make yours." "I already did." The men started closing in. Alara looked around desperately for an escape route, but there was nowhere to go. The land office was locked. The nearest cover was 20 feet away. They'd be on her before she made it 5 steps. She was going to lose. After everything, the ambush, the flight, keeping Ravenwolf alive, making it to Garrison Falls, she was going to lose because she'd gotten here 30 minutes too early. Then a gunshot cracked across the square. The lead man dropped, clutching his leg. The others scattered, drawing their weapons, looking around for the shooter. Another shot, and one of the men by the alley went down. "Up there!" someone shouted, pointing. Alara looked up and saw a figure on the roof of the general store. Even at this distance, she recognized him. Raven Wolf, propped against the false front, his rifle trained on the square below. He looked terrible, barely able to stay upright, but his aim was steady. "Next one goes through someone's head," he called down. "Your choice." The remaining men looked at each other, then at their wounded companions, then back up at the roof. "This isn't over," one of them said, but they were already backing away, dragging their injured with them. Alara slumped against the door, her legs suddenly unable to hold her weight. The door opened behind her, and she nearly fell backward into the office. Pettigrew caught her arm, steadying her. "Perhaps," he said, his voice shaking slightly, "we should process your claim now." The inside of the land office was cramped and smelled of old paper and ink. Pettigrew led Alara to a desk piled high with documents and ledgers, then sat down heavily in his chair. "Let me see your papers," he said. Alara opened the tin box with trembling fingers and pulled out the deed and the water rights documentation. She spread them on the desk. Pettigrew examined them with painstaking care, checking signatures, comparing them against records in one of his ledgers. Minutes ticked by. Outside, Alara could hear shouting, more of Crow's men arriving probably. "These appear to be in order," Pettigrew said finally, "but there's already a claim filed on this property. Filed yesterday, in fact, by Victor Crow." Alara's heart sank. "On what grounds?" "Adverse possession. He claims he's been working the land for 3 years without challenge, making improvements, and thus has earned the right to it under territorial law." "That's a lie. My father was alive until 3 days ago. He owned that land legally." "Can you prove your father's death occurred only 3 days ago?" "There's a body in our cabin and witnesses who saw him alive last week." Pettigrew removed his spectacles and cleaned them on his shirt. "Miss Quinn, I'm going to be frank with you. Victor Crow is a powerful man. He has resources I don't. If I process your claim, he'll contest it. It'll go to a territorial judge, and territorial judges have a way of ruling in favor of whoever can afford the better lawyers. So you're saying I've already lost? I'm saying the law will take its course, which isn't always the same as justice. He put his spectacles back on. However, your claim is legitimate. It predates Crow's by years, and more importantly, it was filed by your father, who is now deceased, making you the legal heir. That's not something Crow can easily dismiss. Will you process it? Pettigrew looked at her for a long moment. Then he pulled out a blank form and dipped his pen in ink. I will, though I suspect I'm going to regret this. He filled out the form with meticulous care, copying information from the deed and water rights documents. Then he had Alara sign in 3 places, witnessed each signature himself, and stamped the whole thing with an official seal. There, he said, filed and registered as of, he checked his pocket watch, 7:43 in the morning. Your claim now has legal standing. What happens next? Crow will contest it. There'll be a hearing, probably in 3 to 4 weeks. You'll need to appear with evidence supporting your claim, witnesses, documentation proving your father's ownership and recent death, anything that undermines Crow's adverse possession argument. And in the meantime, neither of you can legally access the land or the water. It's frozen pending resolution. Alara felt something cold settle in her stomach. If Crow can't access the water, his operation's shut down. Temporarily, yes. Which means he's going to be very motivated to make this problem go away before the hearing. Pettigrew nodded grimly. I'd suggest you find somewhere safe to wait out the next few weeks. Somewhere Crow's people can't reach you. Alara stood up, collecting her documents. Thank you, Mr. Pettigrew. Don't thank me yet. I just painted a target on both of us. She left the land office and stepped back into the square. The sun was fully up now, and the town was coming to life. She didn't see any of Crow's men, but she didn't kid herself that they were gone. A low whistle drew her attention to an alley across the square. Raven Wolf stood there, leaning heavily against a wall, his rifle slung over his shoulder. Alara crossed to him quickly. You should be resting. I was. Then I saw Crow's men moving into position and figured you could use backup. He studied her face. Did you file it? I filed it. Good. Now we need to leave before they regroup. He started to push off from the wall and staggered. Alara caught him, feeling fresh blood soaking through his shirt. You tore the wound open again. Add it to the list. He nodded toward the end of the alley. Mrs. Chen has the horse ready. We ride north. North? I thought we'd go back to where? Your father's cabin? They'll burn it to the ground looking for you. East to the next town? They'll follow. South puts us deeper into Crow's territory. He met her eyes. North is treaty land. My grandfather's people. It's the only place Crow's men won't follow easily. Won't that cause problems? A settler woman on treaty land? Probably. But it's better than being dead. They made their way to the back of Mrs. Chen's boarding house, where the widow had the geldings saddled and supplied. She pressed a bundle of food into Alara's hands and refused payment. You caused quite a ruckus, she said, but she was almost smiling. Pettigrew hasn't looked that scared since the last time Crow's men came to lean on him. It was good to see. Thank you for everything. Don't thank me, just survive. And if you get a chance to take Crow down, take it. That man's a cancer on this territory. They rode out of Garrison Falls heading north, moving as fast as Raven Wolf's condition allowed. The landscape gradually shifted from settler territory to wilder country, rolling hills covered in pine, rocky outcroppings, frozen streams cutting through valleys. They rode for hours, stopping only when Raven Wolf absolutely had to rest. Each time they stopped, Alara checked his wound. Each time, it was worse. The flesh angry and inflamed, the infection spreading despite the cauterization. He needed proper medical care, needed someone who actually knew what they were doing. As the sun started to sink toward the horizon, they crested a hill, and Alara saw smoke rising from a valley below. Not just one fire, dozens of them, spread out in a rough circle. There, Raven Wolf said, his voice hoarse. My grandfather's camp. They descended into the valley as dusk gathered. People emerged from lodges and shelters, watching their approach with guarded expressions. Alara saw rifles, saw hands on knife hilts. She understood. A wounded warrior bringing a settler woman into the camp would raise questions. An older woman approached as they reached the camp's edge. She looked at Ravenwolf, and her expression shifted from suspicion to alarm. "Get the medicine woman," she called over her shoulder. Then to Ravenwolf, "Can you dismount?" "If I have to." The woman, Alara would learn later her name was Bluebird, helped them both down from the horse. Other women came forward, supporting Ravenwolf, half carrying him toward one of the larger lodges. Bluebird turned to Alara. "You're the Quinn girl." It wasn't a question. "How did you—" "Your father visited here once, traded horses with Standing Bear. You look like him." She gestured for Alara to follow. "Come. Standing Bear will want to speak with you." The lodge Bluebird led her to was larger than the others, with smoke rising from the center hole. Inside it was warm and dim, lit by a central fire. An old man sat on the far side of the fire, his face deeply lined, his long hair white. But his eyes were sharp and knowing as they settled on Alara. "Sit," he said in accented English. Alara sat, suddenly aware of how filthy she was, how out of place. Bluebird settled beside Standing Bear, murmuring to him in their language. Standing Bear listened, then looked back at Alara. "My grandson brings you here." "Why?" Alara pulled the tin box from inside her coat and set it on the ground between them. "My father is dead. Victor Crow killed him, or had him killed, because of what's in this box. Land deeds, water rights, proof that I own 1,200 acres that Crow's been using to fund his operations. And you come here because my father told me to find you. Because Raven Wolf said you've been trying to stop Crow's push into treaty land. Because I filed a legal claim this morning that freezes Crow's access to water, which means his operations are shut down until there's a hearing." She paused. "Because I think we want the same thing." "And what is that?" "To destroy Victor Crow's empire." Standing Bear was quiet for a long time, studying her. Then he said, "You know what Crow does? The camps he runs? I know he traffics women. I know he enslaves them. My granddaughter is in one of those camps, has been for 3 months. Raven Wolf has been searching for her, but there are many camps and they move frequently." He leaned forward slightly. "Do you know where they are?" "One of Crow's men told us about a camp 15 miles north of where we met, near an old mill. But I don't know if—" "We know that camp," Bluebird said. "Raven Wolf raided it 2 weeks ago, freed 7 women. But Aida wasn't among them." "Then there are more camps," Alara said. "And if we can shut down Crow's funding, we can find them, free everyone." "Or," Standing Bear said quietly, "Crow realizes he's losing control and disposes of evidence, including the women." The words hit Alara like cold water. She hadn't thought of that, hadn't considered that cutting off Crow's resources might push him to eliminate liabilities. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We move fast," a new voice said from the lodge entrance. A woman stepped inside, mid-30s, with a rifle slung over her shoulder and a scar running down the left side of her face. "We hit the camps before Crow realizes what's happening. Free everyone we can, gather evidence while we're at it." "This is Red Sky," Standing Bear said. "She leads our warriors." Red Sky settled by the fire, her expression hard. "I've been tracking Crow's operations for 2 years. I know of 4 camps in the territory, maybe 5. But hitting them all at once requires more people than we have." "What about allies?" Alara asked. "You said there were others who wanted Crow stopped. Settlers whose families he destroyed, law enforcement not on his payroll. A few. But coordinating them without Crow finding out?" Red Sky shook her head. "It's risky." "Everything is risky," Alara said. "We're already at war whether we like it or not. The question is whether we fight back or just wait to be picked off one by one." Red Sky smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. "I like her." "The hearing is in 3 to 4 weeks, Alara continued. "That's our deadline. We need to free the women, gather evidence, and prepare to face Crow in court before then." "And you think the court will rule against him?" Bluebird asked. "Even with evidence?" "I think if we can prove he's running a trafficking network, it won't matter how many judges he owns. The territorial governor will have to act. The federal marshals will have to act." Alara met Standing Bear's eyes. "My father believed the treaties should be honored, believed this land belongs to your people. If we can expose what Crow's been doing, the trafficking, the illegal mining, the encroachment on treaty land, We can bring down his entire operation." Standing Bear studied her for another long moment. Then he nodded slowly. "We will help you. But understand this. Many of my people have died fighting Crow's encroachment. Many more have lost family to his camps. If we do this, we do it right. No half measures. No mercy for those who profit from suffering." "I'm not asking for mercy," Alara said. "I'm asking for justice." "Then we will see if justice is possible in your courts." Standing Bear looked at Red Sky. "Gather the council. We have plans to make." Red Sky stood and left. Bluebird excused herself as well, leaving Alara alone with Standing Bear. "Your father was a good man," the elder said after a moment. "He saw us as people, not obstacles. That's rare among settlers. He taught me that the land doesn't belong to anyone. We just borrow it for a while." "Wise words, though your legal claim suggests you believe otherwise." Alara felt her cheeks heat. "The claim is tactical, a way to cut off Crow's resources. I'm not planning to." "Peace, child. I'm not accusing you of anything. I'm simply noting the contradiction." Standing Bear smiled faintly. "But contradictions are how change happens. You use the tools of the system to fight the system. It's clever." A commotion outside drew their attention. Alara heard raised voices, then someone calling for Standing Bear. The elder stood, and Alara followed him out of the lodge. A crowd had gathered near the medicine woman's lodge, people talking in urgent tones. Bluebird pushed through the crowd to reach them. "It's Raven Wolf. The medicine woman says the infection is worse than she thought. She hesitated, glancing at Alara. "She needs to know if we should save his strength for fighting or for healing." "What does that mean?" Alara demanded. "It means the wound may have spread poison through his blood," Standing Bear said quietly. "It means he may not survive the night. And if he does, he may not have the strength to fight again for weeks. The medicine woman is asking us to choose. Does she use her strongest remedies now, which will save him but leave him weak? Or does she use gentler treatments that preserve his strength for battle but may not save him?" Alara stared at him. "That's not a choice. You save him. Obviously, you save him." "Is it obvious?" Standing Bear's expression was sorrowful but firm. "We are about to go to war with a powerful enemy. Raven Wolf is our best warrior, our best tracker. If he survives but cannot fight, we lose a weapon we desperately need. If he dies quickly, we can at least prepare for that loss. You're talking about letting him die to make planning easier. I'm talking about the hard mathematics of survival." Standing Bear looked at the crowd, at the faces of his people. "We are not a large tribe. Every warrior matters. Every choice matters." Alara felt rage building in her chest. "He saved my life, twice. I'm not letting him die because it's tactically convenient. It's not your decision to make." "The hell it isn't." Alara pushed past Bluebird and headed for the medicine woman's lodge. She heard Standing Bear call after her, but she didn't stop. Inside the lodge, Raven Wolf lay on a pallet near the fire, his skin gray and sheened with sweat. The medicine woman, an ancient-looking woman with knowing eyes, knelt beside him, her hands hovering over his wounded side. "Save him," Alara said. The medicine woman looked up. "You are the settler girl. I'm the girl he saved, and I'm telling you to save him. Use whatever remedies you need. Your grandfather wants him preserved for battle." "My grandfather is dead. His grandfather is outside making calculations about acceptable losses. I'm right here telling you what Raven Wolf would want." "And you know what he would want?" Alara thought about the way Raven Wolf had talked about his sister, the way he'd risked everything to free 7 women from a camp, the way he'd stood on a rooftop barely able to hold a rifle and still taken the shot to protect Alara. "He'd want to survive," she said. "He'd want to keep fighting. He'd want to find Aita, and he can't do any of that if he's dead." The medicine woman regarded her for a long moment. Then she nodded and began pulling bundles of herbs from a leather bag. "Hold him down," she said. "This will hurt, and he may struggle." Alara knelt beside Raven Wolf and pressed her hands against his shoulders. His eyes fluttered open, unfocused. "Alara? I'm here. The medicine woman is going to help you." "The claim. Did you—" "I filed it. It's done. Now stop talking and let her work." The medicine woman began applying a paste to his wound that smelled sharp and bitter. Raven Wolf's body went rigid, his breathing harsh. Alara held him down, murmuring things she didn't even register. Just a steady stream of words meant to anchor him. After what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, the medicine woman sat back. Now we wait. If the fever breaks by dawn, he'll live. If not... She didn't finish the sentence. Alara stayed by Raven Wolf's side through the night, dozing fitfully, waking whenever he stirred. Sometime near dawn, she felt his forehead and realized it was cooler. Not much, but enough. The fever had broken. She must have fallen asleep after that because the next thing she knew, sunlight was filtering through the lodge entrance and someone was shaking her shoulder. "Miss Quinn, the council is meeting." Alara sat up, disoriented. Raven Wolf was still unconscious but breathing steadily. The medicine woman sat nearby, nodding her approval. "He'll live," she said, "but he won't fight for 2 weeks. Maybe 3. Alara followed Bluebird to a large clearing where maybe 30 people had gathered. Tribal members, a few settlers Alara didn't recognize, and one person who made her do a double take. A middle-aged woman in a schoolteacher's dress standing stiffly among the warriors. "Who's that?" Alara whispered to Bluebird. "Helen Marsh. She runs the school in Willow Bend. Also runs an underground network that helps women escape from Crow's camps." Alara stared. The woman looked like she should be teaching children arithmetic, not running a resistance network. Standing Bear stood at the center of the clearing and raised his hand for silence. "We are here to plan war against Victor Crow. Some of you have been fighting this war for years. Others are new to it. But we all want the same thing, to end his operations and free those he has enslaved." He gestured to Alara. "This is Alara Quinn. She has filed a legal claim that freezes Crow's access to the main water source for his operations. This gives us a window, perhaps 3 weeks, to strike before the courts resolve the claim." 3 weeks isn't enough, Red Sky said. "We've identified 4 camps. Hitting them all requires coordination, planning, supplies we don't have." "Then we prioritize," Alara said. "Which camp is most important?" "The one at Sterling Creek," Helen Marsh said, her voice prim and certain. "It's his newest, built in the last 6 weeks. That's where he's keeping his latest acquisitions." The way she said acquisitions, like they were property, not people, made Alara's stomach turn. "How many women?" Red Sky asked. "At least 15, maybe 20. Helen paused. "One of them is Aida." The clearing went silent. Standing Bear's expression didn't change, but Alara saw his hands tighten into fists. "You're certain?" "I have a contact inside Crow's organization. He confirmed it 2 days ago." "Then Sterling Creek is our first target," Standing Bear said. "How soon can we move?" "The camp is guarded," Helen said. 8 men, rotating shifts. The terrain is difficult, narrow canyon, only one way in and out. We'd need at least 15 warriors to take it by force." "We don't have 15 warriors," Red Sky said flatly. "We have 8, maybe 10 if we pull in everyone." "I can fight," Alara said. Several people turned to look at her. Red Sky's expression was skeptical. "You know how to use a rifle?" "I know how to point one and pull the trigger. That's more than nothing. It's also less than helpful if you get yourself killed in the first 5 minutes." "Then teach me not to get killed." Red Sky and Standing Bear exchanged a look. Then Red Sky smiled, sharp and dangerous. 2 days. I'll teach you enough to maybe not die. Then we ride for Sterling Creek. The next 2 days were brutal. Red Sky drilled Alara relentlessly on rifle handling, cover, and movement, and what to do when everything went wrong. She wasn't gentle about it. "You're slow," Red Sky said, watching Alara scramble behind a boulder. "By the time you got to cover, you'd be dead 3 times over." "I'm doing my best." "Your best isn't good enough." Again. But slowly, Alara started to get it, started to understand how to move low and fast, how to use terrain, how to breathe through the fear. On the second night, she sat by the fire with Helen Marsh, who turned out to be far more complex than her schoolteacher appearance suggested. "How did you get involved in this?" Alara asked. Helen stared into the flames. "Crow's men took my sister 8 years ago. By the time I found out where she was already dead. After that," she shrugged. "After that, I decided if I couldn't save her, I'd save everyone else I could. I'm sorry." "Don't be sorry. Get angry. Angry keeps you moving." On the 3rd morning, they rode out. Red Sky, Standing Bear, 6 warriors, Helen Marsh, and Alara. Raven Wolf had regained consciousness and tried to argue his way into coming, but the medicine woman had threatened to tie him to the bed. "Find her," he'd said to Alara before they left. "Find Aita and bring her home." "I will." They rode for Sterling Creek. The canyon walls rose like broken teeth on either side of the trail, jagged granite streaked with ice. Alara's horse picked its way carefully over loose shale, every step echoing off the stone. Ahead of her, Red Sky rode with the easy confidence of someone who'd made this journey before, her rifle across her saddle, her eyes constantly scanning the high ground. They'd been riding since before dawn, moving in silence through territory that felt increasingly hostile. The closer they got to Sterling Creek, the more evidence they saw of Crow's operations: stumps where ancient trees had been felled, muddy scars where mining equipment had torn into hillsides, and once, disturbingly, a grave marker so fresh the dirt was still dark. Helen Marsh rode near the back of the group, her schoolteacher's dress replaced with practical riding clothes, though she still managed to look somehow prim despite the dust and sweat. She caught Alara looking and offered a thin smile. "Second thoughts?" Helen asked quietly. "About 100 of them." "Good. People without doubts make stupid mistakes." Standing Bear raised a hand and the group came to a halt. They'd reached a point where the canyon narrowed dramatically, the walls so close Alara could have touched both sides if she stretched. Ahead, the passage opened into what looked like a wider basin. "The camp is just beyond," Red Sky said, dismounting. "We leave the horses here. 2 stay with them, the rest move on foot." 2 of the warriors, a young man called Swift Arrow and an older woman named Tall Grass, volunteered to stay behind. The rest of them continued on foot, weapons ready, moving with careful silence. As they approached the mouth of the passage, Alara began to hear sounds: men's voices, laughter, the clink of metal on metal. Her heart hammered against her ribs. Red Sky's training had been intense, but there was a difference between practice and actually moving toward people who would kill her without hesitation. Red Sky held up a closed fist, and everyone froze. She gestured to a narrow ledge that ran along the left wall, about 10 feet up. They'd have to climb, but it would give them a view of the camp without being seen. One by one, they climbed. Alara's hands were slick with sweat despite the cold, and twice she nearly lost her grip. When she finally pulled herself onto the ledge, she had to lie flat and crawl forward on her belly to where Red Sky and Standing Bear were looking down into the basin. The camp was smaller than Alara had expected. Maybe a dozen rough structures built from scrap lumber and canvas, arranged in a loose circle around a central fire pit. Men moved between the buildings with the casual swagger of people who felt completely safe. Alara counted 8 of them, just as Helen had said. But it was the other structure that made Alara's stomach clench. Set apart from the rest, almost backed against the far canyon wall, was a long, low building with barred windows and a heavy door. Even from here, she could see the lock. "That's where they keep the women," Helen whispered, pointing. "How do you know?" "Because I've seen 3 of these camps. They're all laid out the same way. Living quarters for the guards, storage for supplies, and the prison." Helen's voice was flat, emotionless. "Crow is many things, but he's consistent." Standing Bear was studying the camp layout with tactical precision. 8 guards, 4 near the fire, 2 by the supply tent, 2 making rounds. If we move fast and quiet, we can take 4 of them before they know we're here. "And the other 4? One of the warriors asked. "Won't matter if we do it right." Red Sky looked back at the group. "We hit them at shift change. That's when they're most relaxed, least alert." "Helen, you said that happens at dusk?" "According to my contact, yes. The night crew comes out, the day crew goes in to eat. There's about 10 minutes where everyone's bunched up near the fire, passing off duties." Red Sky nodded. "Then we wait for dusk. When they're changing shifts, we move. 3 groups. Standing Bear takes the left flank with 2 warriors. I take the right with 2 more. Alara and Helen, you're with me. We stay in position until I give the signal, then we hit them all at once." "What's the signal?" Alara asked. "You'll know it when you see it." They settled in to wait. The sun crawled across the sky with agonizing slowness. Alara's legs cramped from lying still on the cold stone. Her mouth was dry, her hands shaking slightly no matter how many times she told herself to calm down. Helen lay beside her, breathing slowly and evenly, seemingly unaffected by the weight. After a while, she spoke without looking at Alara. "You ever kill anyone?" Alara shook her head. "Might have to today. You ready for that?" "I don't know." "Honest answer." Helen finally turned to look at her. "When it happens, if it happens, don't think, just act. Thinking gets you killed." "How many have you killed?" Helen's expression didn't change. "Enough to know it doesn't get easier. You just get better at living with it." The light began to fail. Down in the camp, lanterns were being lit. Men emerged from the barracks building, stretching and yawning. The shift change was starting. Red Sky touched Alara's shoulder and gestured for her to follow. They climbed carefully down from the ledge, moving to a position closer to the camp's right side. Two warriors, a lean man called Grey Wolf and a younger woman named Morningstar, came with them. Alara could see Standing Bear and his group positioning themselves on the opposite side, barely visible shadows among the rocks. Below, the 8 guards had gathered near the fire. They were passing around a bottle, laughing about something. One of them, a heavy-set man with a scarred face, was doing an impression of someone, waving his arms wildly. The others hooted with laughter. They were so casual, so comfortable. It made Alara sick. Red Sky raised her rifle slowly, sighting down the barrel. Alara did the same, her hands trembling. She'd picked one of the guards at random, a tall man with a drooping mustache who stood slightly apart from the others. Red Sky fired. The scarred man went down, a red flower blooming on his chest. For half a second, the other guards just stared in confusion. Then Standing Bear's group opened fire from the opposite side, and 2 more guards dropped. The remaining 5 scattered, shouting, drawing weapons. One of them fired wildly at the rocks, his bullet whining off stone 20 feet from Alara's position. "Now!" Red Sky shouted. They broke from cover, rushing down into the camp. It was chaos, men running, shouting, trying to find cover. Alara saw Grey Wolf tackle one of the guards, his knife flashing in the firelight. Morningstar fired twice, methodical and calm. A guard appeared in front of Alara, raising a pistol. She didn't think, just pulled the trigger. The rifle kicked hard against her shoulder, and the guard spun sideways, clutching his arm. Not dead, but down. Someone crashed into her from the side, and Alara went sprawling. Her rifle flew from her hand, skittering across the dirt. A guard loomed over her, his face twisted with rage, raising the butt of his rifle to smash down on her head. Helen Marsh shot him through the throat. The guard made a horrible gurgling sound and collapsed. Helen helped Alara to her feet without a word, then turned and shot another guard who was trying to flank Standing Bear's position. The whole fight lasted maybe 2 minutes. When the gunfire stopped, 6 guards were dead or dying. 1 had fled into the darkness. 1, the man Alara had shot in the arm, was on his knees, hands raised, bleeding heavily. Red Sky walked over to him and pressed her rifle barrel against his forehead. "Keys to the prison," she said. "Now." "In the guardhouse," the man gasped. "On the table. I swear, please don't." Red Sky hit him across the face with the rifle butt. He went down and stayed down. Grey Wolf ran to the guardhouse and emerged moments later with a ring of keys. He tossed them to Standing Bear, who caught them and headed for the barred building. Alara followed, her legs shaking, her hands still vibrating with adrenaline and terror. Helen walked beside her, reloading her pistol with steady hands. Standing Bear reached the heavy door and tried 3 keys before finding the right one. The lock clicked open. He pulled the door wide. The smell hit Alara first. Unwashed bodies, sickness, fear. Then her eyes adjusted to the dim interior. Women. 15, maybe 20 of them, huddled on pallets along the walls or sitting on the floor. They ranged in age from barely more than girls to women in their 40s. They wore torn dresses, most of them filthy. Many had bruises. Some had worse. They stared at the doorway with expressions of hollow terror. "We're here to help," Standing Bear said in English, then repeated it in Lakota. "We're taking you out of here. You're safe now." None of them moved. Helen pushed past Standing Bear and walked into the room. She crouched down near the closest woman, a girl who couldn't have been more than 16. "My name is Helen," she said quietly. "I run a school in Willow Bend. I've helped women escape from places like this before. We have horses. We have supplies. We can take you somewhere Crow's people can't reach you." She paused. But we need to move now, before more guards come. The girl looked at Helen for a long moment. Then she started to cry. Great shaking sobs that seemed to tear out of her chest. Helen wrapped her arms around the girl and held her. I know, but you have to be strong a little longer. Can you do that? The girl nodded against Helen's shoulder. Good. Help me get the others moving. Slowly, painfully, the women began to stand. Some helped others who couldn't walk on their own. One woman, gaunt and hollow-eyed, just sat against the wall, staring at nothing. Alara approached her carefully. We need to go. No response. Please, we can't leave you here. The woman finally looked at Alara. Why not? There's nothing left. There's freedom. There's freedom. The woman laughed, a sound like breaking glass. You think that matters after what they did? You think there's somewhere I can go where I'm not… She stopped, her breath hitching. Alara didn't have an answer, didn't have words for the kind of trauma she was seeing, so she just held out her hand. Come with us anyway. You can decide what matters later. The woman stared at Alara's hand. Then, slowly, she reached out and took it. They got all the women out of the building and into the canyon. Swift Arrow and Tall Grass had brought the horses forward, and they began organizing people. Those who could ride, those who needed to double up, those who could barely stay upright. Standing Bear moved through the group, looking at each face. His expression remained neutral, but Alara could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his hands clenched and unclenched. He was looking for Aita. Finally, he stopped in front of a young woman with long dark hair and Standing Bear's eyes. She was thin, bruised, one arm held at an awkward angle like it had been broken and healed wrong. Grandfather, she said, and her voice broke on the word. Standing Bear pulled her into his arms and held her, his weathered face finally showing emotion, grief and rage and relief all mixed together. Red Sky came over to Alara. We need to move. That guard who ran will bring reinforcements. We have maybe an hour before this place is swarming with Crow's men. What about the evidence? Helen said we needed to gather evidence. Take what you can carry. Documents, ledgers, anything that ties this operation to Crow. But we can't stay long enough for a thorough search. Alara ran back to the guardhouse and began rifling through papers on the table. Most of it was garbage, supply lists, shift schedules. But in a locked box under the table, she found a ledger. She opened it and felt her stomach turn. Names, dates, amounts of money. It was a sales record, women bought and sold like livestock. And at the top of each page, stamped in neat letters, Crow Enterprises. She grabbed the ledger and anything else that looked official, stuffing it all into a saddlebag. As she turned to leave, something caught her eye. A telegram half burned in the stove. She pulled it out carefully. Most of it was charred, but she could make out fragments. 3 new acquisitions arriving Thursday, and payment in full upon delivery. And at the bottom, a signature, V. Crow. Direct evidence. This was direct evidence linking Crow to the trafficking operation. Alara pocketed the telegram and ran back to where the others were mounting up. The women who'd been imprisoned were being distributed among the horses, none of them speaking, all of them moving with the mechanical efficiency of deep shock. Aida was riding with Standing Bear, her arms wrapped around her grandfather's waist, her face pressed against his back. Alara could see her shoulders shaking. They rode out of Sterling Creek as fast as the group could manage, which wasn't very fast with so many injured and traumatized people. Every sound made Alara jump, every crack of a branch, every distant bird call. She kept expecting to hear gunfire behind them, kept imagining Crow's reinforcements appearing on the trail ahead. But they made it to the main canyon without incident. As they passed the narrow section where they'd first entered, Red Sky set 2 warriors to cover their rear while the rest of the group kept moving. An hour later, they stopped to rest and redistribute the load. Several of the rescued women had started talking quietly among themselves, sharing water, helping those who were struggling. Helen moved among them with practiced efficiency, offering words of comfort, checking injuries. She stopped next to a woman with a split lip and a blackened eye. "What's your name?" Helen asked. "Margaret Frost." "Where are you from, Margaret?" "Bismarck. I was traveling to visit my sister in Helena. My coach was attacked about 3 months ago. They killed the driver and took me and 2 other women. The others…" She stopped, her voice failing. I'm so sorry that happened to you." Helen squeezed Margaret's hand. But you're free now, and I'm going to make sure you get somewhere safe. Safe. Margaret looked at Helen with dead eyes. Is there anywhere safe anymore? Helen didn't answer that. She just moved on to the next woman. Alara watched, feeling utterly useless. She'd spent the last week focused on the land claim, on tactics and strategy, but she hadn't really thought about what came after. What happened to these women once they were free? Where did they go? How did they rebuild lives that had been shattered? Standing Bear rode up beside her. You're quiet. Just thinking. About? What happens next? We freed these women, but Crow still has other camps, other prisoners. And even if we shut down all his operations, what about the women he's already sold? The ones scattered across the territory? We can't save everyone, Standing Bear said. His voice was gentle but firm. We can only save who we can save and keep fighting. That doesn't feel like enough. It never does. But it's what we have. He paused. My granddaughter is alive because you filed that land claim, because you refused to run. 7 other women are free because you helped us plan this raid. That's not nothing. Alara looked back at the group of rescued women. They looked broken, most of them. But some were starting to talk, starting to help each other. There was life there, however fragile. The ledger I found, Alara said. It has names, dates, money. It's direct evidence linking Crow to the trafficking. Standing Bear's expression hardened. Good. We'll need it for the hearing. If we survive that long, that guard who escaped will tell Crow what happened. He'll know we're coming for him. Let him know. Let him be afraid for once. They rode through the night, stopping only when the horses absolutely had to rest. By dawn, they'd put 20 miles between themselves and Sterling Creek. The rescued women were beyond exhausted, several of them barely conscious in their saddles. Red Sky found a sheltered valley with a stream and decent cover. We camp here for the day. Rest, eat, tend to the wounded. We move again at dusk. Setting up camp was chaotic. Most of the rescued women had no survival skills. They were city women, farmers' daughters, not frontier survivors. Helen and the tribal women did their best to organize things, but it was clear this group couldn't travel fast or far. Alara helped set up a fire while Grey Wolf and Morning Star stood watch. As she arranged kindling, Aida approached her. You're the one who owns the water rights, Aida said. It wasn't a question. Yes, my brother told me about you. Before they took me. Aida sat down across from the fire pit. He said you might be the key to stopping all this. I hope he's right. But right now I'm just trying not to get everyone killed. Aida smiled slightly, though it didn't reach her eyes. That's all any of us can do. She paused. Thank you. For filing the claim. For helping my grandfather plan this. For coming to get us even though you didn't have to. I did have to. Your brother saved my life. This is not a debt, Aida interrupted. Don't make it transactional. You came because it was right. That matters. Alara didn't know what to say to that, so she just nodded and focused on the fire. As the sun climbed higher, people began to settle in to rest. Helen had organized the rescued women into small groups, pairing the most traumatized with those who seemed more stable. It wasn't perfect, but it was something. Alara found a spot under a pine tree and leaned back against the trunk, intending to rest for just a few minutes. She woke to someone shaking her shoulder in full darkness around her. We have a problem, Red Sky said quietly. Alara sat up fast, her hand going to the rifle beside her. What kind of problem? 4 riders on our trail. They've been following us since Sterling Creek. They're about an hour behind. Only 4? That we can see. Could be more hanging back. Red Sky's expression was grim. Either way, they're tracking us. And with this many people, we can't move fast enough to lose them. Standing Bear joined them. We need to slow them down. Give the main group time to reach the treaty lands. A rear guard, Red Sky said. 3 warriors, good positions. Hit them hard and fast. I'll go, Alara said. Both Red Sky and Standing Bear looked at her like she'd suggested flying to the moon. You barely survived 1 fight, Red Sky said. This will be different. These won't be camp guards half drunk and comfortable. These will be hunters who know we're armed and ready. Then you'll need every rifle you can get. I'm not great, but I can shoot, and I can follow orders. Alara met Red Sky's eyes. Plus, if I die, the land claim still stands. It goes to probate, which ties up Crow's water access for months. I'm tactically expendable. Terrible logic, Standing Bear said, but not wrong. He looked at Red Sky. She comes, but she stays in the back position. If things go bad, she runs. That's the deal, Standing Bear said flatly. You want to fight, you follow orders. And the order is, if we get overrun, you run back to the main group and warn them. Alara wanted to argue, but recognized the futility. Fine. Red Sky picked Grey Wolf and Morning Star for the rear guard. The 5 of them let the main group ride ahead, then doubled back to find good ambush positions along the trail. They settled in to wait as the sky began to lighten in the east. Alara's position was behind a cluster of boulders about 50 yards back from where Red Sky, Standing Bear, and the other 2 had set up. From here, she had a clear view of the trail, but was partially hidden from anyone approaching. The minutes crawled by. Alara's hands were cold despite her gloves. She kept checking her rifle, making sure the action was smooth, the rounds properly seated. Then she heard it. Hoofbeats. Slow and careful, but getting closer. 4 riders appeared around a bend in the trail, moving in a loose formation. They looked alert, weapons drawn. One of them, a man with a thick beard, kept scanning the high ground like he expected trouble. Red Sky let them get close. Very close. Alara could see the riders' faces clearly, could see the tension in their postures. The bearded man suddenly raised a hand and the riders stopped. "Something's wrong," he called out. "Pull back." Too late. Red Sky fired, and the lead rider went down. Grey Wolf and Morning Star opened up a second later, and another rider fell. The remaining 2 scattered, returning fire wildly. One of them spurred his horse directly toward Alara's position. She fired without thinking. The bullet went wide, but it made the rider veer left, away from her. Standing Bear took the shot, and the rider tumbled from his saddle. The last man, the bearded one, wheeled his horse and rode hard back the way he'd come, bullets kicking up dirt around him. He disappeared around the bend. "Let him go," Red Sky called. "We don't have time for a pursuit." They climbed down from their positions and checked the bodies. 3 dead. No identification on any of them, just weapons and ammunition. "Professional trackers," Standing Bear said, examining one man's gear. "Crow's sending his best." "Then he knows we hit Sterling Creek," Grey Wolf said. "He's hunting us. Let him hunt. We're almost to treaty land. Once we cross that boundary, he has to be more careful." Red Sky looked back toward where the 4th rider had fled. "But we need to move fast. That one will bring more." They mounted up and rode hard to catch the main group. By the time they reunited, it was mid-morning, and everyone was exhausted. But they were also close. Alara could feel it, a shift in the landscape, a sense of crossing an invisible line. They were entering territory that belonged to Standing Bear's people, protected by treaties that Crow couldn't openly violate without bringing down federal attention. They reached the main camp just before noon. It was bigger than the smaller camp Alara had stayed in before, maybe 100 people spread across a wide valley, with lodges and shelters arranged in careful patterns. People emerged to meet them, faces showing shock and then determination as they saw the rescued women. Within minutes, the camp had mobilized. Fires built up, food prepared, the medicine women summoned to treat injuries. Alara dismounted and immediately felt her legs nearly give out. She'd been riding for almost 2 days straight with minimal rest. Everything hurt. Helen appeared beside her, looking somehow both exhausted and energized. "Come on, we need to get these women settled and then plan our next move." "Next move? We just got here. And Crow knows where we are, or will soon enough. We can't just sit here and hope he goes away." Helen started walking toward one of the larger lodges. "We need to hit him again, harder this time." Inside the lodge, Standing Bear had gathered his council. Tribal elders, Red Sky, a few settlers Alara didn't recognize. They stood around a rough map drawn in the dirt, marking locations. "We've confirmed 4 camps total," one of the elders was saying. "Sterling Creek is shut down. That leaves 3 active sites, one near the old copper mine, one in the timber country north of Willow Bend, and one we just learned about near Fort Laramie." "Fort Laramie is too close to federal troops," Red Sky said. "Crow's either incredibly bold or incredibly stupid to run a camp there." "Or he has protection," Helen said quietly. My sources say there's a colonel at the fort who's on Crow's payroll, looks the other way in exchange for a cut of the profits. The room went silent. If that's true, Standing Bear said slowly, then Crow's corruption goes deeper than we thought. We're not just fighting one man, we're fighting a system. Then we break the system, Alara said. All eyes turned to her. We document everything, every camp, every officer on his payroll, every dollar changing hands. We build a case so airtight that even the territorial governor can't ignore it. And how do we do that? One of the elders asked skeptically. We're not lawyers, we're not investigators. No, but I am. A new voice came from the lodge entrance. Alara turned to see a man in his 50s, well-dressed in a city suit, carrying a leather document case. My name is Thomas Brennan. I'm an attorney from Denver, and I've been investigating Victor Crow for 18 months. The room erupted in questions. Standing Bear raised a hand for silence. Explain, he said simply. Brennan set his case on the ground and pulled out a thick folder. I represent the families of 7 women who disappeared in Crow's territory. I've been gathering evidence, but I could never get close to his operations. Too many people protecting him. Too much money changing hands. He looked around the room. But I heard about the Sterling Creek raid. Heard about a young woman who filed a land claim that's frozen Crow's water access. I came to offer my services. What kind of services? Alara asked. Legal expertise, documentation strategies, testimony preparation. Brennan smiled grimly. And most importantly, contacts. I know 3 federal marshals who are clean. I know a territorial judge who's been looking for a reason to go after Crow. I know newspaper editors in 4 cities who would love to break this story. He paused. You've got the evidence and the courage. I've got the connections and the legal knowledge. Together, we might actually pull this off. Standing Bear studied Brennan for a long moment. Why should we trust you? Because one of the women who disappeared was my daughter. The words hung in the air. Brennan's professional mask slipped just for a second, and Alara saw the raw grief underneath. Her name was Sarah, he continued quietly. She was 19, traveling to meet her fiancé in Cheyenne. Her coach was attacked 6 months ago. I've been searching for her ever since. He met Standing Bear's eyes. I don't know if she's still alive. But if she is, I want her found. And if she's not, his voice hardened, then I want the man responsible to pay for it. Standing Bear nodded slowly. Show us what you have. Brennan opened his case and began spreading documents across the lodge floor. Maps, financial records, testimony from survivors, shipping manifests that showed suspicious cargo movements, telegraph records showing coded messages between Crow and his associates. It was overwhelming, and it was damning. This is incredible, Helen said, scanning one of the financial documents. This shows Crow moving almost $50,000 through dummy companies in the last year alone. That's just what I could track, Brennan said. The real number is probably 3 times that. He's built an empire, and trafficking is only part of it. He's also running illegal mining operations, smuggling weapons, bribing officials at every level. And you couldn't get anyone to act on this? Red Sky asked. I tried. Took it to the territorial attorney general. He buried it. Took it to the federal prosecutor in Cheyenne. He said there wasn't enough evidence. Brennan's expression was bitter. That's when I realized the corruption went too high. I needed something explosive, something so public they couldn't ignore it. Like a land claim that shuts down his water supply, Alara said slowly, and simultaneous raids on his camps that free dozens of women and seize his records. Exactly. You've handed me the explosive evidence I needed. Now I just need to light the fuse. How? Standing Bear asked. Brennan pulled out a newspaper from his case. In 3 days, there's a territorial governor's conference in Cheyenne. Every important official in the region will be there. If we can get this story in front of them, complete with rescued women willing to testify, documented evidence, and a legal filing that exposes the whole operation, they'll have no choice but to act. That's a big if, one of the elders said. How do we get women who've been traumatized to travel to Cheyenne and testify in front of officials who might not even believe them? We don't force anyone, Helen said firmly. We ask. We explain what's at stake, and we let them decide. Aida stood up from where she'd been sitting quietly in the corner. I'll testify. Standing Bear turned to her. Aida, you don't have to. Yes, I do. Because there are still women in those other camps, still women being sold and transported. If my testimony helps stop that, then I'll do it. She looked around the room. But I won't be the only one. Talk to the others. Some of them will want to fight back. Over the next hour, Helen and Aida went through the camp, talking quietly with the rescued women. Elara watched from a distance as the conversation happened, saw some women shake their heads, saw others nod slowly, saw a few start to cry. In the end, 7 women agreed to testify. 7 out of 20. It would have to be enough. That night, as the camp settled in and people tried to rest, Elara found herself sitting by a fire with Standing Bear and Red Sky. They were planning the next raid, the camp near the copper mine, which intelligence suggested held another 15 to 20 women. "We hit it tomorrow night," Red Sky said, "before Crow can reinforce it, before he moves the prisoners." "We'll be spread thin," Standing Bear warned. "Some of our warriors are escorting the women who agreed to testify to Cheyenne. Others are scouting the remaining camps. Then we bring in the settlers who've been helping us," Red Sky said, "the ones whose families Crow destroyed. They'll fight." As they talked strategy, Elara felt the weight of everything pressing down on her. 3 weeks ago, she'd been burying her father and running for her life. Now she was planning military raids and preparing for a legal battle that could reshape the entire territory. She thought about her father's letter. "Don't die for land. Don't die for my mistakes." But this wasn't about land anymore. It was about the women in those camps, about Aita and Margaret and all the others whose names she didn't even know yet, about building something better than the broken system that had allowed Crow to thrive. "I'm going on the copper mine raid," Elara said suddenly. Red Sky and Standing Bear looked at her. "You've done enough," Standing Bear said. "You should go to Cheyenne with Brennan, help prepare the testimony." "Helen can do that better than I can. I'm more useful with a rifle." Elara met his eyes. "And I need to see this through. All of it." Red Sky studied her for a moment, then nodded. "All right, but this time you're not in the back position. You're in the main assault team. Think you can handle that?" "I'll find out." They rode for the copper mine the next evening, 12 warriors, 8 settlers, and Elara. It was the largest strike force they'd assembled, and it felt both powerful and fragile. The mine sat in a barren valley, the earth torn up and poisoned by decades of excavation. The camp itself was built around the old mine structures, using the buildings for storage and housing. As they approached, Elara could see guards on patrol, more than at Sterling Creek. Crow had reinforced his operations after the first raid. 16 men, Red Sky counted, maybe more inside the buildings. This is going to be ugly. They split into 3 groups. Red Sky led the main assault team, including Elara, straight at the front gate. Standing Bear took a team around the back to cut off escape routes. Grey Wolf led a smaller team to secure the building where the women were held. They moved into position as the moon rose, casting everything in silver light. Elara's hands were steadier than last time. She'd learned something about herself in that first fight. She could function under fire. Not gracefully, not heroically, but she could do what needed to be done. Red Sky gave the signal. They charged the gate. Gunfire erupted immediately. Elara ran low, staying behind Red Sky, her rifle up and ready. A guard appeared in front of her, raising his weapon. She fired first. The guard went down. She'd killed him. She was almost certain she'd killed him. There was no time to think about it. They crashed through the gate into chaos. Guards were everywhere, taking cover behind equipment, returning fire. One of the settlers next to Elara took a bullet in the shoulder and went down screaming. Elara grabbed him and dragged him behind an overturned ore cart, then fired at a guard position until her rifle clicked empty. She reloaded with shaking hands, her ears ringing from the gunfire. Grey Wolf's team reached the prison building. Elara saw them break down the door and disappear inside. The fighting intensified. Crow's guards were better trained, better armed than the camp guards had been. They fought with coordinated tactics, covering each other, falling back to stronger positions. But Red Sky's team had fury on their side. They pushed forward relentlessly, and slowly, painfully, they gained ground. A guard appeared on the roof of the main building with a rifle. He shot Morningstar through the leg, then swung his rifle toward Red Sky. Elara didn't think. She aimed and fired. The guard fell from the roof and hit the ground with a sickening crunch. "Good shot," Red Sky said, not even looking back. The fight lasted almost 20 minutes, an eternity of noise and blood and terror. When it finally ended, 11 guards were dead, 4 had fled, and 1 was captured. 5 of their own fighters were wounded. None fatally, but it had been close. Grey Wolf emerged from the prison building with 16 women, all of them in various states of shock and injury. Some could walk on their own. Others had to be carried. One of them, Ilara noticed, was barely conscious, her face so bruised it was hard to make out her features. "We need to get them out of here," Grey Wolf said. "Now, before reinforcements arrive." They loaded the women onto horses and started the retreat. Behind them, Ilara could see smoke rising from the camp. Someone had set fire to the buildings. As they rode, Ilara found herself next to Thomas Brennan, who'd insisted on coming along despite having no combat experience. "I found her," he said, his voice breaking. He was looking at the barely conscious woman who was being carried by one of the warriors. Ilara looked closer and realized the woman had Brennan's eyes. His daughter, Sarah. "Is she alive?" "Barely, but alive." Tears were streaming down Brennan's face. Thank you for—" He couldn't finish. They rode through the night, putting distance between themselves and the copper mine. As dawn broke, they reached the treaty lands again. The camp was in controlled chaos when they arrived. The women who'd agreed to testify were preparing to leave for Cheyenne. Warriors were organizing supply lines, and in the center of it all, Standing Bear stood with a grim expression, holding a telegram. "What is it?" Red Sky asked. "Crow's moving. He's consolidated his forces, abandoned the remaining camps, and pulled everyone to his main compound near Prairie Valley." Standing Bear looked up. "He's preparing for a siege, and he's taken hostages." "What kind of hostages?" Ilara demanded. 43 women from his camps. He's moved them all to the compound and is threatening to kill them if we attack. Standing Bear's voice was tight with controlled rage. "He's also filed an emergency petition with the territorial court, claiming you forged your father's land documents and that he's the legal owner of the water rights." Ilara felt the ground drop out from under her. "Can he do that?" "He already did. The hearing's been moved up. Instead of 3 weeks, we have 5 days." Standing Bear looked at Brennan. "Can we win in 5 days?" Brennan's expression was grim. "I don't know, but we're going to try." The ride to Cheyenne took 2 days of hard travel. Ilara rode with Brennan, the 7 women who'd agreed to testify, and an armed escort of 6 warriors led by Grey Wolf. They moved fast, stopping only when absolutely necessary, always watching their back trail for signs of pursuit. Sarah Brennan rode in a travois pulled by one of the horses, too weak to sit upright. Her father rode beside her constantly, talking to her in low tones, even when she was unconscious. Ilara couldn't hear what he said, but she could see the desperate hope in his face every time Sarah's eyes fluttered open. The other women were quiet, withdrawn. Margaret Frost, the woman from Bismarck, stared straight ahead as she rode, her hands gripping the reins so tightly her knuckles were white. A younger woman named Caroline kept looking back over her shoulder like she expected Crow's men to appear at any moment. Only Aida seemed relatively calm. She rode near the front of the group, her broken arm bound in a sling, her face set with determination. When they stopped to rest the horses, she helped the other women dismount, offered them water, spoke quietly to those who were struggling. On the second morning, as they crested a hill and saw Cheyenne spread out in the valley below, Brennan rode up beside Ilara. "When we get there, I need you to let me do the talking initially. The territorial officials know me, but they don't trust me. I've been pushing this case too hard for too long. They think I'm obsessed, that I'm seeing conspiracies where there's just unfortunate coincidence. But now you have proof. Now I have proof they can't easily dismiss. But we have to present it carefully. If we come in too aggressive, they'll shut down. If we seem too emotional, they'll call us hysterical." He looked back at the women riding behind them. "We need to be smart about this." Cheyenne was bigger than any town Ilara had seen. Maybe 2,000 people, with actual paved streets in the center and buildings made of brick instead of wood. The territorial capitol building dominated the main square, an imposing structure with white columns and a copper dome. Brennan led them to a boarding house on the edge of town, run by a stern-faced woman named Mrs. Fletcher, who asked no questions when Brennan paid for rooms in advance. The warriors made camp just outside town, not wanting to draw attention. That afternoon, Brennan met with his contacts while Ilara helped settle the women. Most of them wanted to sleep, to hide, to pretend the world didn't exist for a few hours. Ilara couldn't blame them. She was helping Aida change the dressing on her arm when Brennan returned, his expression grim. The hearing is tomorrow morning, 9 o'clock. Crow's already in town with a team of lawyers from Denver. They're claiming your father's deed is fraudulent, that the water rights were never properly transferred, and that Crow has legitimate adverse possession claims based on 3 years of continuous use. But that's a lie. My father was alive until... They're claiming he abandoned the property 2 years ago, that he moved east and left the land untended, which gave Crow the right to use it. Brennan sat down heavily. They have witnesses who'll testify to this. Paid witnesses. Of course, but proving that in one day of testimony is going to be difficult. He rubbed his face. There's more. The judge assigned to the case is Marcus Holloway. He's known to be sympathetic to business interests. I was hoping for Judge Warren. She's tougher to buy, but Holloway pulled rank and took the case himself. So he's on Crow's payroll. Probably, but we can't prove that either. Brennan looked at Alara. I need you to be prepared for the possibility that we lose tomorrow, that Holloway rules in Crow's favor and the water rights go to him. Alara felt something cold settle in her stomach. If that happens, Crow wins. He gets the water back, his operations resume, and the women he's holding hostage. I know. Brennan's voice was tight. That's why we have a backup plan. If the hearing goes badly, we bypass the territorial court entirely and go straight to the federal authorities. I have a contact with the U.S. Marshal Service. If we can get him the evidence we've gathered, the ledgers, the testimonies, the documentation of Crow's trafficking network, he'll bring in federal troops. How long would that take? Weeks? Maybe months. We don't have weeks. Crow has 43 women in that compound. If he thinks he's losing, he'll... Alara couldn't finish the sentence. Aida spoke up from where she sat on the bed. Then we make sure the hearing doesn't go badly. We make it impossible for Judge Holloway to rule in Crow's favor without exposing himself as corrupt. How? Brennan asked. By making it public. Very public. Aida looked at Alara. You said Brennan has contacts with newspaper editors. Get them there tomorrow. Pack the courtroom with reporters. Make this about more than just a land dispute. Make it about trafficking, corruption, the violation of treaties. Make it so big that Holloway can't sweep it under the rug, even if he wants to. Brennan stared at her. That's actually brilliant, but also dangerous. If we go public like that, Crow will know we're exposing his entire operation. He might panic. He's already panicked, Aida said. Why else would he take hostages? He knows he's losing control. The question is whether we can break him completely before he does something desperate. Alara thought about the telegram she'd found at Sterling Creek, the ledger documenting sales, the women they'd freed who bore the scars of Crow's empire. We do both, she said. Tomorrow, we present our case in court with as many reporters watching as possible, but we also send word to Standing Bear and Red Sky. Tell them to prepare for an assault on Crow's compound. If the hearing goes our way, Crow loses the legal battle and we can demand the hostages be released. If it doesn't, we hit him anyway before he can hurt those women. That's a hell of a gamble, Brennan said. Everything we've done has been a gamble. This is just one more. That night, Alara couldn't sleep. She sat by the window of her room, watching the street below, thinking about everything that had led to this moment. Her father's death, the ambush, meeting Raven Wolf, filing the claim, the raids. All of it had been building toward tomorrow. She pulled out her father's letter and read it again by lamplight. Don't die for land, don't die for my mistakes. But this wasn't about land anymore. It had never really been about land. It was about what land represented. Power, resources, the ability to control people's lives. Crow had built an empire on that power, and now they were going to tear it down. Or die trying. The courtroom was packed when they arrived the next morning. Brennan had done his work. There were reporters from 4 different newspapers, several federal observers, and a crowd of locals who'd heard rumors about what this case was really about. Judge Holloway looked distinctly unhappy about the attention. He was a heavy-set man in his 50s with thinning hair and a permanent scowl. He sat behind the bench, gaveling for order as people filed in. Crow sat at the plaintiff's table with 3 lawyers in expensive suits. He was smaller than Alara had imagined. Maybe mid-50s, well-dressed, with cold gray eyes, and the kind of face that could sell you poison and make you thank him for it. He looked at Alara with an expression of mild curiosity, like she was an interesting problem to be solved. Alara sat at the defendant's table with Brennan. Behind them, the 7 women who'd agreed to testify sat in the gallery, their presence a silent accusation. Holloway banged his gavel. This court is now in session. We're here to address the land claim dispute between Victor Crow and Alara Quinn regarding 1,200 acres in Prairie Valley, including associated water rights. Mr. Brennan, you're representing Miss Quinn? I am, Your Honor. And Mr. Crow is represented by Wallace, Drummond, and Associates, Your Honor. The lead lawyer stood, a tall man with silver hair and a voice like honey over gravel. I'm Edward Wallace. We're here to demonstrate that Mr. Crow's claim to the disputed property is legitimate and that Miss Quinn's filing is based on fraudulent documentation. Those are serious allegations, Mr. Wallace. We have serious evidence, Your Honor. Holloway nodded. Very well. Mr. Wallace, present your case. Wallace launched into a detailed argument about adverse possession, citing territorial law and precedent. He produced witnesses. 3 men who testified that they'd seen the Quinn property abandoned for 2 years, that William Quinn had moved east, that no one had contested Crow's use of the land or water. Brennan cross-examined each witness, exposing contradictions in their testimony, but Wallace was good. He'd prepared his witnesses well, and their stories held together just enough to seem credible. Then Wallace dropped his bomb. Your Honor, I'd like to present evidence that the deed Miss Quinn is using to support her claim is a forgery. We have a handwriting expert who's examined the document and determined that William Quinn's signature was added after his death. The courtroom erupted. Reporters scribbled furiously. Holloway banged his gavel. Order! I'll have order! Alara grabbed Brennan's arm. That's insane. The deed is from 15 years ago. My father... I know, Brennan said quietly. It's a lie. But it's a convincing lie, and we need to counter it fast. Wallace called his handwriting expert, a pompous man from Denver who testified with absolute certainty that the signature was fraudulent. He had charts, analysis, comparisons. It was all theater, Alara realized. Expensive, convincing theater designed to muddy the waters and give Holloway an excuse to rule in Crow's favor. When it was Brennan's turn, he stood slowly. Your Honor, I'd like to shift the focus of this hearing because while Mr. Wallace has spent considerable time questioning the legitimacy of a 15-year-old property deed, he's failed to address a more pressing question. What exactly has Mr. Crow been using this land and water for? Wallace jumped to his feet. Objection. The use of the property is irrelevant to the ownership question. I disagree, Brennan said calmly. If Mr. Crow's claim rests on adverse possession, on the idea that he's been improving and using the property, then the nature of that use is absolutely relevant. Holloway looked like he'd swallowed something sour. Overruled, but make it quick, Mr. Brennan. I'll call my first witness, Aida Wolf. Aida stood and walked to the witness stand. She looked small and fragile with her arm in a sling, but her voice was steady as she took the oath. Miss Wolf, can you tell the court where you were 3 months ago? I was traveling from my grandfather's camp to Willow Bend. My wagon was attacked by armed men. They killed my driver and took me prisoner. And where were you held? In a camp near Sterling Creek. It was one of several camps operated by Victor Crow where women are imprisoned and sold. The courtroom exploded. Wallace was on his feet shouting objections. Holloway banged his gavel so hard Alara thought he might break it. This is outrageous, Wallace yelled. These are baseless accusations with no relevance to the property dispute. They have every relevance, Brennan shot back, because Mr. Crow has been using Miss Quinn's water to support illegal operations, including human trafficking. That water has been diverted to mining camps where enslaved women are forced to work. It's been used to support timber operations staffed by kidnapped prisoners. The property Mr. Crow claims to have improved through adverse possession has actually been the foundation of a criminal empire. Holloway looked like he wanted to shut this down, but the reporters were writing frantically, and several federal observers were leaning forward with intense interest. I'll allow the testimony, Holloway said finally, but it better connect to the property claim, Mr. Brennan. Brennan nodded. Miss Wolf, how were you freed? A raid on the camp, led by my grandfather and others, including Miss Quinn. And what did you find at this camp? 15 women held prisoner, guards with weapons, and documents, ledgers showing sales of women, financial records linking the operation directly to Victor Crow. Wallace was trying to object, but his voice was lost in the noise from the gallery. Brennan pressed on. "I'd like to enter into evidence this ledger, recovered from the Sterling Creek camp." He held up the book Alara had found. "It contains detailed records of women bought and sold over a 2-year period. Every page is stamped with Crow Enterprises. Every transaction is signed by Mr. Crow's representatives." He passed the ledger to the bailiff, who brought it to Judge Holloway. The judge opened it, and Alara saw his expression change as he read. Whatever he'd been prepared to do, whatever ruling he'd been paid to make, this was making it difficult. Brennan called Margaret Frost next, then Caroline, then 2 other women. Each told similar stories, captured while traveling, held in camps, forced to work, beaten if they resisted. Each identified Victor Crow as the man ultimately responsible. Crow himself sat motionless through all of it, his expression never changing. But Alara noticed his hands clenching and unclenching under the table. When it was Wallace's turn to cross-examine, he tried to discredit the women, suggested they were lying for money, that they'd been coached, that their stories were too similar to be true. But it fell flat. The women's pain was too real, their testimonies too detailed. Then Brennan called his final witness, Thomas Brennan himself. "Your Honor, I'm not just Miss Quinn's attorney. I'm also the father of Sarah Brennan, one of the women held in Mr. Crow's camps. She was taken 6 months ago. I've spent that time gathering evidence against Crow's operations, documenting his trafficking network, and trying to get territorial authorities to act." "And why didn't they act?" Holloway asked, his voice carefully neutral. "Because Victor Crow has spent years building influence, bribing officials, threatening anyone who gets too close. The corruption goes deep, Your Honor, very deep." The implication hung in the air. Holloway's face reddened. "Are you suggesting—" "I'm suggesting that this case is bigger than a property dispute. I'm suggesting that if this court rules in Crow's favor, it will be enabling a criminal operation that has destroyed hundreds of lives. And I'm suggesting that every person in this room, including the federal observers and the press, will be watching very carefully how this court rules." Wallace leapt to his feet. "Your Honor, this is completely inappropriate. Mr. Brennan is trying to intimidate this court." "I'm trying to ensure justice is done," Brennan said. "There's a difference." Holloway looked around the courtroom at the reporters, the observers, the women in the gallery. Alara could see him calculating, trying to find a way out of the trap Brennan had built. "We'll take a 30-minute recess," he said finally. "When we return, I'll hear closing arguments and render a decision." The recess was tense. Crow left the courtroom surrounded by his lawyers, his face still showing no emotion. Alara watched him go and felt a chill. He was too calm. Someone facing exposure like this should be panicking, but Crow looked like a man who still had cards to play. "We did it," Brennan said, but he didn't sound convinced. "We got everything on the record. The ledger, the testimonies, the connections to Crow. Even if Holloway rules against us on the property claim, the federal observers heard everything. They'll have to investigate." "Unless Crow runs," Alara said. "Unless he takes his money and his people and disappears before anyone can act. Where would he go? We've exposed his network. His assets are tied up in the territory. He has 43 women in that compound. That's leverage, hostages." Alara looked at Aida. "We need to get word to Standing Bear. Tell him to move on the compound now, before Crow can react to what happened here." Aida nodded and slipped out of the courtroom. When court resumed, Wallace made his closing argument, a last desperate attempt to keep the focus on the property dispute and away from the trafficking allegations. But it was hollow, and everyone in the room knew it. Brennan's closing was simple and devastating. "Your Honor, the evidence is clear. Miss Quinn's claim is legitimate. Her father owned that land legally until his death 3 days before she filed. The deed is genuine. The water rights are genuine. Mr. Crow's claim of adverse possession is based on illegal use of property that was never abandoned. But more than that, ruling in Crow's favor would be ruling in favor of a criminal operation that has caused immeasurable suffering. The question before this court isn't just about property. It's about whether we live in a territory where the law protects people or where it protects those with enough money to buy justice." He sat down. The courtroom was silent. Holloway sat behind his bench, staring at the papers in front of him. Minutes ticked by. Finally, he looked up. "I'm going to rule on the narrow legal question before me. Who has legitimate claim to the property in Prairie Valley? Based on the evidence presented, I find that Alara Quinn's deed predates Mr. Crow's adverse possession claim and appears to be genuine. The property, including water rights, belongs to Miss Quinn. The courtroom erupted. Alara felt Brennan grab her arm, his grip tight with relief. However, Holloway continued, raising his voice over the noise, the allegations made against Mr. Crow regarding criminal activity are beyond the scope of this court. I'm referring this matter to the U.S. Marshal's Office for investigation. Mr. Crow, you're ordered to appear before a federal magistrate within 48 hours to answer questions regarding your business operations. Court is adjourned. He banged the gavel and left quickly, like he couldn't wait to get out of the room. Crow stood slowly. He looked directly at Alara, and for the first time she saw emotion in his face, cold, calculating rage. Then he smiled. "Congratulations, Miss Quinn," he said, his voice carrying across the courtroom. "You've won your little legal victory. I hope it was worth it." He turned and walked out, his lawyers trailing behind him. "That was a threat," Brennan said quietly. "He's going to do something." Alara was already moving toward the door. "We need to get to Standing Bear, now!" They ran from the courthouse to where Grey Wolf and the warriors were camped. Aida was already there, talking urgently with Grey Wolf in their language. "Did you send word?" Alara demanded. "I sent a rider an hour ago," Aida said. "He should reach my grandfather by tonight." "That might not be fast enough." Crow left the courtroom like a man with a plan. "If he reaches his compound before we do." A gunshot cracked across the camp. Everyone dropped, scrambling for weapons. Alara looked around wildly, trying to see where the shot had come from. Then she saw the rider, one of Standing Bear's warriors, racing into camp on a lathered horse. He was bleeding from a wound in his side, barely staying in the saddle. Grey Wolf ran to catch him as he fell from the horse. "What happened?" Grey Wolf demanded in English. The warrior gasped something in Lakota. Grey Wolf's expression went dark. "What did he say?" Alara asked. "Crow's compound. They're under attack. Not from us, from Crow's own men. He's executing the hostages." Alara felt the world tilt. No, he wouldn't. "He knows he's lost," Aida said, her voice tight. "He knows the federal marshals are coming, so he's destroying evidence, including the women who could testify against him." "How far is the compound from here?" 20 miles, maybe 25. "We can make it in 2 hours if we ride hard." Grey Wolf looked at Alara like she was insane. "We're 6 warriors and a lawyer. Crow has dozens of men at that compound. We'd be riding into a slaughter." "Then we ride into a slaughter," Alara said, "because the alternative is letting 43 women die." Brennan stepped forward. "I'm coming." "You're not a fighter." "Neither are you particularly, but we're both going anyway." He looked at Grey Wolf. "How many men can you gather in the next hour?" "Here? Maybe 10. But Standing Bear and Red Sky are already moving on the compound. They had 20 warriors with them." "Not enough," Alara said. "Crow will have fortified after the raids. He'll be ready for an assault." "Then what do we do?" Aida asked. Alara thought fast. "We don't assault. We create a distraction, draw his forces out, make them think they're facing a larger attack than they are. Meanwhile, a small team goes in the back and gets the hostages out." "That's suicide," Grey Wolf said flatly. "Maybe, but it's better than letting them all die without trying." They gathered what forces they could. The 6 warriors from Grey Wolf's escort, Brennan, Alara, and surprisingly, 2 of the rescued women who insisted on coming, Margaret Frost and a woman named Anna who'd been freed from the copper mine camp. "You've been through enough," Alara told them. "You don't have to do this." "Those women in that compound are us," Margaret said. "A week ago, a month ago, if someone had given up on us, we'd be dead. We're not giving up on them." They rode hard, pushing the horses to their limits. The sun was setting as they approached Prairie Valley, the sky streaked red and orange. Alara could see smoke rising in the distance. "The compound," Grey Wolf said. "Something's burning." They pushed the horses harder. As they got closer, Alara could hear gunfire. Sustained, heavy fire. A full battle was happening. They crested a ridge and looked down into the valley. Crow's compound sprawled below, a central building surrounded by smaller structures, all enclosed by a wooden palisade. The gates were closed, and men with rifles lined the walls. Outside the walls, Alara could see Standing Bear's forces, spread out in a rough semicircle, using whatever cover they could find, exchanging fire with the defenders. "We're too late," Brennan said. "The assault's already started." "Then we join it," Alara said. "Grey Wolf, take your warriors and reinforce Standing Bear's left flank. Brennan, you and the women circle around to the right. I'm going to find another way in." "Alone? That's insane." "I'm small and fast. I can get places a warrior can't. Just give me 20 minutes. If I'm not back by then, assume I'm dead and do what you have to do." Before anyone could argue, Alara spurred her horse down the ridge toward the compound. She rode until she was out of sight of both the warriors and the compound defenders, then dismounted and tied her horse in a small grove of trees. From here she approached on foot, moving low and quiet. The back wall of the compound was less defended, only 2 guards that she could see, both focused on the battle at the front gates. Alara circled wide, using the gathering darkness for cover. She found what she was looking for, a drainage culvert that ran under the wall, probably for runoff during heavy rains. It was barely 2 feet across, clogged with mud and debris, but it was a way in. Alara crawled into the culvert, her rifle slung across her back, trying not to think about what would happen if she got stuck. The tunnel was tight, dark, and smelled of rot and stagnant water. She pulled herself forward inch by inch, her shoulders scraping against the sides. After what felt like an eternity, she emerged on the other side, inside the compound. She was behind a storage building, out of sight of the main battle. She could hear shouting, gunfire, screaming. The compound was chaos. Alara moved between buildings, heading for the largest structure in the center. That's where Crow would keep the hostages. Somewhere he could control them, use them as leverage. She was almost to the main building when she heard a woman scream. Alara ran toward the sound, abandoning stealth. She rounded a corner and saw them, 6 women being herded at gunpoint toward a building that was already on fire. 3 of Crow's men were driving them forward, weapons raised. "Move!" one of the men shouted. "Get inside!" "You're going to burn us alive!" one of the women screamed. "Should have thought of that before you became evidence." Alara raised her rifle, her hands shaking. 3 men. 3 shots. At this distance, in this light, she'd be lucky to hit one. She fired anyway. The first guard went down, clutching his leg. The other 2 spun toward her, bringing their weapons up. Alara dove behind a water trough as bullets tore through the air where she'd been standing. She rolled, came up firing, missed, fired again. The second guard dropped. The third guard had a clear shot at her. Alara saw him aim, saw his finger tighten on the trigger, then his head snapped back, and he fell. Behind him, Raven Wolf lowered his rifle. He looked terrible, pale, moving with obvious pain, barely healed from his wound. But he was here, and he was alive. "What are you doing here?" Alara demanded. "Saving you. Again, we need to stop meeting like this." He moved to the women huddled by the burning building. "Can you walk?" They nodded, too shocked to speak. "Then run. Get to the back wall. There's a drainage tunnel. Go through it and head north. Don't stop until you reach the treaty lands." "What about the others?" one woman asked. "There are more of us, locked in the cellar under the main building." Raven Wolf and Alara exchanged looks. "How many?" Alara asked. "Maybe 30, maybe more. They put us down there this morning, said we were being moved. Then the shooting started and they locked the door." Raven Wolf checked his rifle. "We get them out. All of them. There could be a dozen guards in that building." "Probably. You have a better idea?" Alara didn't. "Let's go." They crossed the compound at a run, ducking behind cover when guards appeared, moving fast between the buildings. The main structure loomed ahead, 2 stories of rough lumber with shuttered windows and a heavy door. As they approached, the door opened and Griggs Hale stepped out. He saw them and smiled. "Well, this is convenient. Mr. Crow's been looking for you, Miss Quinn." He raised his pistol. Raven Wolf shot him through the shoulder. Hale spun sideways, dropping his weapon, and Alara was on him before he could recover. She hit him across the face with her rifle butt, and he went down hard. "That's for my father," she hissed. They stepped over Hale's body and entered the building. The inside was sparse. A few rooms, a staircase leading up, and in the floor, a heavy trapdoor with a chain and padlock. "There," Raven Wolf said, pointing at the trapdoor. They found keys on a table, several sets, like someone had been preparing for exactly this situation. The third key worked. Alara pulled the trapdoor open and looked down into darkness. "Hello?" she called. "We're here to get you out." Faces appeared in the dim light from below, women, filthy and terrified, looking up with desperate hope. "Is this real?" one of them asked. "Or are they playing another trick?" "It's real. Come on, quickly." They started climbing out, slow at first, then faster as they realized this was genuine. Alara counted as they emerged. 15, 20, 25, 32 women total. "Is that everyone?" Ravenwolf asked. "There were more," one woman said, "but they took some this morning, before the shooting started. Moved them somewhere else." "Where?" "I don't know. The explosion cut her off. The whole building shook. Flames erupted from the second floor, and suddenly there was fire everywhere. Someone had set charges, Alara realized. Someone was trying to bring the whole place down. "Out!" Ravenwolf shouted. "Everyone out now!" They ran for the door as the building groaned and shifted around them. Smoke filled the air, choking and thick. Alara grabbed a woman who'd fallen and hauled her upright, pushing her toward the exit. They burst out into the compound just as the second floor collapsed inward with a roar of timber and flame. But the compound was different now. The gunfire had stopped. Standing Bear's forces were inside the walls, overwhelming the remaining guards. Red Sky appeared through the smoke, her rifle up, scanning for threats. "The hostages?" she demanded. 32 of them, Alara said. "But there are more. Somewhere." "Crow's gone," Red Sky said. "He left 10 minutes ago with a group of his men. Rode west toward the mining operations." "How many went with him?" 8, maybe 10, and he took prisoners with him. Women on horses, all of them bound. The remaining hostages. Crow had taken his most valuable leverage and run. "We go after him," Alara said. "You can barely stand," Red Sky said to Ravenwolf. "You're in no condition." "I'm going," Ravenwolf said flatly. "You can come with me or not." Standing Bear appeared, supporting a wounded warrior. His face was grim. "Let them go. We have the compound. We freed most of the women. That's a victory." "Not while Crow has hostages," Alara said. "Not while he's still breathing." "Then you're riding into a trap. He's drawing you out, wants you to follow so he can kill you away from witnesses." "Probably, but I'm going anyway." Standing Bear studied her for a long moment. Then he nodded. "Take Red Sky and 6 warriors. Move fast. And if you can't save the hostages, kill Crow. Make sure he can never do this again." They mounted up minutes later, Alara, Ravenwolf, Red Sky, and 6 of the best warriors. The compound was still burning behind them as they rode west into the gathering darkness. They followed Crow's trail by the light of a rising moon. He wasn't trying to hide his tracks. He was moving fast, staying ahead of pursuit. After an hour of hard riding, they spotted firelight ahead. Red Sky held up a hand, and they slowed. Through the trees, Alara could see a mining operation, old and partially abandoned, with equipment scattered around and a massive wooden structure that looked like a water tower or processing facility. At the base of the structure, Crow stood with his remaining men, and bound to posts in front of him were 11 women. "He's using them as shields," Red Sky said quietly. "We can't get a clear shot without risking the hostages." Crow's voice carried across the distance. "I know you're out there. I know you followed me, so let's talk." "What does he want?" Ravenwolf asked. Ravenwolf. "Probably to negotiate, or to buy time." Red Sky scanned the area. "The water tower. That's what he's near. It's part of the old flume system, carries water from the river to the processing equipment." Alara looked up at the tower, following its lines. It was massive, maybe 60 feet tall, with a wooden trough running from the top down toward the river. If someone could redirect that flow. "I'm going up there," she said. "To do what?" "To turn their own system against them. If I can redirect the water, send it flooding through that area, it'll scatter Crow's men, give you a chance to get the hostages." "That's insane. You'll be completely exposed." "You have a better idea?" Red Sky didn't. Alara dismounted and started working her way around the edge of the mining operation, using the darkness and scattered equipment for cover. It took 20 minutes of careful movement to reach the base of the water tower. The ladder up the side was old and rusted, and it creaked alarmingly when Alara put her weight on it. But it held. She climbed, trying not to look down, focusing on the next rung, then the next. The rifle on her back felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Her hands were slick with sweat despite the cold. Below, she could hear Crow talking, though she couldn't make out the words. He was stalling, she realized, waiting for something. Reinforcements? Or just dawn, when he could see clearly to kill anyone who attacked? Alara reached the top of the tower and pulled herself onto the narrow platform. The flume ran past her, carrying water from somewhere upstream. There was a gate mechanism, rusted but still functional, that controlled the flow. She examined it quickly. If she opened the gate fully and broke the trough below, the water would flood down instead of following its intended path. It would hit the area where Crow stood like a small tsunami. It would also probably kill anyone who didn't get out of the way fast enough, including the hostages. Alara looked down at the scene below. Crow stood in front of the bound women, using them as human shields. His men were positioned around the perimeter. Red Sky and the warriors were hidden in the darkness beyond, waiting for an opening. This could work, or it could be a disaster. Alara started working on the gate mechanism, trying to loosen the rusted wheel. It fought her, refusing to budge. Below, Crow's voice rose. "I'm done waiting. You have 1 minute to show yourselves, or I start executing hostages." The wheel still wouldn't move. 30 seconds. Alara threw her full weight against the wheel. Something in the mechanism cracked, and suddenly it was spinning freely. The gate opened, and water surged through the flume with tremendous force. Now for the hard part. Alara pulled out her knife and started hacking at the supports holding the trough in place. The wood was old, partially rotted, but it was still thick. She chopped desperately, feeling the structure shake under the force of the water. Below, Crow had a gun to one of the hostages' heads. The first support gave way with a sharp crack. The trough sagged, but held. Crow pulled the trigger. The hostage screamed, but no gunshot came. Misfire, or an empty chamber. It didn't matter. He had seconds before he tried again. Alara hacked at the second support, putting every ounce of strength she had into it. It broke. The trough collapsed, and thousands of gallons of water poured down in a roaring cascade. It hit the ground like a hammer, sweeping through the area where Crow stood. Men scattered. Horses bolted. The bound women were caught in the flood but alive, the posts they were tied to keeping them anchored while the water rushed past. Red Sky and her warriors charged in during the chaos, cutting down Crow's men as they tried to recover. It was brutal and fast. Alara started climbing down the tower, moving as quickly as she dared. She was halfway down when she saw Crow emerge from the flood, soaked but alive, a pistol in his hand. He saw Red Sky approaching and raised his weapon. Alara didn't think. She just let go of the ladder. She fell maybe 15 feet, hitting the mud hard enough to knock the breath from her lungs. Before she could stand, before she could even process what she'd done, she grabbed her rifle and fired. The shot went wide. Of course it did. She'd just fallen off a tower and could barely see straight. But it made Crow flinch, made him turn toward her instead of Red Sky. He aimed at Alara. Then Raven Wolf was there, stepping between them, his own rifle coming up. 2 shots fired simultaneously. Crow's bullet hit Raven Wolf in the chest, the impact spinning him sideways. Raven Wolf's bullet hit Crow in the throat. Both men fell. Alara scrambled to Raven Wolf, pressing her hands against the wound in his chest. Blood welled up between her fingers, hot and dark. "No, no, no, no. You don't get to die. Not after everything." Raven Wolf looked up at her, his breathing labored. "Did we get them all?" Alara looked around. Red Sky and the warriors were cutting the hostages free. All 11 women were alive, traumatized but breathing. "We got them. All of them." Raven Wolf smiled slightly. "Good. That's good. Don't talk. Save your strength. The medicine woman, we'll get you to the medicine woman." "Alara." His hand found hers, slick with blood. "It's done. We finished it." "You're not finished. You're going to be fine." But she could see it in his eyes, could feel it in the way his breathing was getting shallower. Red Sky knelt beside them. "I'll take him. There's a camp 3 miles north. Medicine women there." They lifted Raven Wolf onto a horse, and Red Sky rode with him, moving fast toward help. Alara stood in the mud, covered in blood, and looked at Victor Crow's body. His eyes were still open, staring at nothing. It was over. The Empire was broken. But the cost had been so high. Standing Bear found Alara sitting beside Crow's body as dawn broke over the ruined mining operation. She hadn't moved in over an hour, just sat there in the mud, staring at the man who'd caused so much suffering. "He's dead," Standing Bear said quietly. "Staring at him won't change that." "I know, I just keep thinking, what if we'd moved faster? What if I'd filed the claim a day earlier? What if... What if the world was different than it is?" Standing Bear sat down beside her, his old joints creaking. "You can drive yourself mad with those questions. I know. I've asked them about my granddaughter, about every person Crow took, but the only question that matters now is, what do we do next?" Alara looked at him. "Raven Wolf is alive. Barely. The medicine women are working on him." Standing Bear's voice was carefully neutral. "Whether he stays alive depends on the next few hours." Around them, the warriors were gathering the freed hostages, tending to the wounded, securing the area. Grey Wolf appeared with a leather satchel he'd recovered from Crow's saddlebag. "You should see this," he said, handing it to Alara. Inside were documents, contracts, deeds, financial records, evidence of Crow's entire network, names of officials he'd bribed, records of sales, maps showing locations of operations across 3 territories. "This is everything," Alara said, sifting through the papers. "This could bring down everyone connected to him." "Or it could disappear," Standing Bear said. "Powerful men have a way of making inconvenient evidence vanish, especially when that evidence implicates other powerful men." "Not this time." Alara stood up, clutching the satchel. "Brennan's still in Cheyenne with the federal observers. We get this to them, along with the testimony from the hostages, and they won't be able to sweep it away. The newspapers are already writing about the court case. If we add this, you're assuming the system will work," Standing Bear said, "that laws will be enforced fairly, that justice exists for people like us." "I'm assuming we make it work. We don't give them a choice." Alara looked down at Crow's body one last time. He built his power on people staying silent, staying scared. We're done being silent. They rode back to the main camp with the freed hostages, arriving near midday. The camp had swelled in size. Word had spread about the raids, and settlers who'd lost family to Crow's operations had come seeking news. Women stood at the edge of the camp, holding photographs, asking if anyone had seen their daughters, their sisters, their mothers. Helen Marsh had organized the rescued women into groups, trying to match them with families, trying to help those who had nowhere to go. It was chaos, but it was purposeful chaos. People were being reunited, questions were being answered. Not all the answers were good, but even knowing was better than the endless uncertainty. Alara found Helen sitting with a young woman who was sobbing against her shoulder. "Is she—" Alara started. "Her sister was in one of the camps we didn't reach in time," Helen said quietly. "Crow's men killed the prisoners before we could get there, burned the whole place." The weight of it settled on Alara's chest. They'd saved dozens of women, but they'd lost some too. Couldn't save everyone. "How many?" she asked. "We don't have final numbers yet, but at least 30 women died in the camps before we could reach them. Maybe more." Helen's voice was flat with exhaustion. "Crow gave the order this morning when he knew he was losing, wanted to destroy evidence." Alara thought about that, about the calculation that led a man to order mass murder rather than face justice, about a system that had let him operate for years without consequence. "Where's Brennan?" she asked. "Still in Cheyenne. He sent word an hour ago. The federal marshals are moving. They're seizing Crow's assets, arresting his known associates, and opening a full investigation into territorial corruption." Helen paused. "They want you to testify, you and Standing Bear and anyone else involved in the raids." "When?" 2 weeks. There's going to be a grand jury hearing." Helen finally looked up at Alara. "This is really happening. We're really going to tear down his whole network. If we can prove the connections, if the evidence holds, if witnesses don't recant or disappear." "Always so optimistic," Helen said, but there was a ghost of a smile on her tired face. Alara left her and went to find the Medicine Women's Lodge. Inside, the air was thick with the smell of herbs and smoke. Raven Wolf lay on a pallet, his chest wrapped in bandages, his breathing shallow but steady. The medicine woman, the same ancient woman who'd treated him before, sat beside him, her hands moving in small, precise gestures as she worked. Will he live? Alara asked. I don't know. The bullet missed his heart, but there's damage to his lung. Infection is the enemy now. The medicine woman didn't look up from her work. He's strong, but strength only carries you so far. Alara knelt beside the pallet. Ravenwolf's eyes were closed, his face pale. She took his hand, feeling how cold it was. You have to wake up, she said quietly. You have to see what we built, what we're building. No response, just the shallow rise and fall of his chest. Aida came in, moving carefully with her injured arm. She sat on Ravenwolf's other side and spoke to him in Lakota, her voice soft and urgent. Alara didn't understand the words, but she understood the tone. A sister pleading with her brother to keep fighting. Standing Bear appeared in the doorway. Alara, you're needed. She followed him outside to where a rider had just arrived, one of Brennan's clerks from Cheyenne, carrying official-looking documents. The territorial governor is calling an emergency session, the clerk said, breathless from the hard ride. He's demanding testimony about the raids, about Crow's death, about everything. There are questions about whether you exceeded legal authority, whether the raids were justified, whether we should have let Crow keep trafficking women because we didn't have proper paperwork, Alara said flatly. Is that what they're asking? The clerk looked uncomfortable. There are concerns about vigilante justice, about violence on treaty lands, about... Tell the governor I'll testify, Alara interrupted. Tell him I'll answer every question, but I want something in return. You're not in a position to make demands. I have documents proving the governor's chief of staff took bribes from Crow. I have financial records showing 3 territorial judges on his payroll. I have evidence of corruption that goes all the way to the top. Alara stepped closer to the clerk. So yes, I am in a position to make demands, and here's what I want. Full pardons for everyone involved in the raids, legal recognition of the water rights claim, and a guarantee that the freed women will receive support and protection, not prosecution. The clerk swallowed hard. I'll convey your message. You do that. After the clerk rode off, Standing Bear looked at Alara with something like approval. You're learning how to play their game. I hate their game. That's why you'll be good at it. People who love the game forget it's supposed to serve a purpose. He paused. The question is, what happens after the testimony? After the trials and investigations? You'll still own that land, still control the water. What will you do with it? Alara had been avoiding thinking about that. The land had been a tool, a weapon to use against Crow. But now Crow was dead and the land was just land again, 1,200 acres with the only reliable water source for 50 miles. I don't know, she admitted. My father wanted me to keep it, but he also told me not to die for it. I think he would have wanted me to use it for something good, but I'm not sure what that looks like. There's a third option, Standing Bear said. You could share it. The water, the land. Create something new. What do you mean? The treaties that are supposed to protect our land, they're not worth much when settlers can just take what they want. But if a settler with legal standing chose to share, chose to recognize our rights, it would set a precedent. Standing Bear looked out across the camp, where settlers and tribal members worked side by side tending to the freed women. We've been at war for so long, most people have forgotten we could choose peace. Choose cooperation. You have the power to show them another way. The idea settled in Alara's mind, taking root. A shared settlement, pooled resources, cooperation instead of conquest. It wouldn't be easy, she said. People on both sides would hate it. Settlers would say, I'm betraying them. Your people might see it as another trick. Probably, but the hard things are usually the ones worth doing. Over the next week, Alara split her time between the camp and Cheyenne, preparing testimony while also helping organize care for the freed women. Some had families to return to. Others had nowhere to go and no one to help them. Helen had started putting together a network, safe houses, job placements, medical care. It was rough and underfunded, but it was something. We need a permanent solution, Helen said one evening as they reviewed lists of women who still needed placement. A place they can go to recover, to learn skills, to rebuild their lives, somewhere safe. That costs money, Alara said. A lot of money. Crow had money. His assets are being seized. Some of that could be redirected to help his victims. That's not how it usually works. The government will take it, use it for whatever they want. Then we make them want to use it for this. Helen's expression was determined. We're about to testify in front of territorial officials and federal marshals. We'll have their attention. We demand reparations. Demand that Crow's seized assets go directly to helping the women he hurt. You think they'll agree to that? I think they'll agree to whatever makes them look good in the newspapers. And right now, the newspapers are watching. Helen pulled out a stack of papers, articles from 4 different cities, all covering the raids, the court case, Crow's death. We're the biggest story in the territory. They can't ignore us. The grand jury hearing took place in Cheyenne's federal courthouse, an imposing stone building that made Alara feel small and out of place. She wore a borrowed dress that didn't quite fit, her hands still bearing scars from the fights and the hard writing. The hearing room was packed. Officials, reporters, curious citizens, and the freed women who'd come to bear witness. Alara testified for 6 hours. She walked them through everything: her father's death, the ambush, meeting Raven Wolf, filing the claim, the raids on the camps, the final confrontation at the mining operation. She answered questions about who gave the orders, who fired which shots, who made which decisions. Some of the questions were hostile, clearly designed to make her seem like a vigilante or a troublemaker. But Brennan had prepared her well, and she kept her answers direct and factual. When they asked her about killing Crow's men, she didn't flinch. Yes, I shot people. I killed at least 2 men, possibly more. They were armed guards working for a trafficking operation. They were standing between us and prisoners being held against their will. I would do it again. The room went silent. Even knowing it was technically illegal, the lead prosecutor asked, that you had no legal authority to raid those camps? The law wasn't protecting those women. The law had been bought and paid for by the man enslaving them. So yes, I acted outside the law, because sometimes the law is wrong, and someone has to stand up and say so. The prosecutor looked like he wanted to argue, but the federal marshal observing the proceedings leaned forward. Miss Quinn, let me ask you directly. If you had tried to go through proper legal channels, reported Crow's operations to local authorities, what do you think would have happened? Nothing, because Crow owned the local authorities. Sheriff Tate was on his payroll. The territorial attorney general buried evidence. Half the judges in the region took his bribes. Alara pulled out the documents she'd recovered from Crow's saddlebag. I have proof, names, dates, amounts. It's all here. The hearing recessed while officials examined the documents. When it resumed 2 hours later, the tone had shifted. The questions became less about prosecuting Alara and more about building a case against Crow's network. Standing Bear testified next, describing years of fighting Crow's encroachment onto treaty lands, the women from his tribe who'd disappeared, the systematic corruption that protected Crow's operations. Then Aida testified. She described her capture, her imprisonment, what happened in the camps. She didn't spare details. Her testimony was raw and devastating, and by the end of it, several people in the room were crying. 7 more women testified over the next 2 days. Each told similar stories. Each added pieces to the larger picture of Crow's empire. On the 4th day, the grand jury returned with their decision. Indictments for 16 of Crow's associates, including 2 judges, a sheriff, and a territorial official. Recommendations for federal investigation into corruption across the territory. And unexpectedly, a resolution that a portion of Crow's seized assets would be used to establish a recovery center for trafficking victims. Helen had gotten what she wanted. After the hearing, Alara stood on the courthouse steps with Brennan, watching the reporters scatter to file their stories. We won, Brennan said. Not everything we wanted, but more than I expected. What happens to your daughter? Alara asked. Brennan's expression softened. She's recovering, slowly. Helen's network found her a place to stay in Denver, near a hospital that specializes in trauma cases. She's got a long road ahead, but she's alive. He paused. Because of you. Because you refused to accept that this was just how things are. I had a lot of help. You had help because you started fighting, because you made people believe things could change. Brennan handed her a document. This is the deed to your father's land, officially recognized, no contest. The water rights are yours, legally and completely. What you do with them is up to you. Alara looked at the document. 1,200 acres. The source of all this conflict. The tool that had brought down an empire. I have an idea, she said. But I'm going to need a good lawyer to make it work. Brennan smiled. I might know one. Raven Wolf woke up on the 10th day after the shooting. Alara was sitting beside him when his eyes opened, and for a moment he just looked at her, confused. Where? The camp. The Medicine Women's Lodge. You've been unconscious for over a week. He tried to sit up and immediately fell back with a groan. What happened? You took a bullet saving my life. Again. It's becoming a habit. Crow? Dead. His network dismantled. The camps are shut down. The women are free. Alara helped him drink some water. We won. Raven Wolf processed this slowly. Aita? Safe. Healing. She's been here every day talking to you in Lakota. The medicine woman says it helped. And the land, the water rights? Still mine. Legally recognized. Alara paused. I have a proposal for your grandfather. Want to hear it? Over the next hour, as Raven Wolf drifted in and out of consciousness, Alara outlined her plan. A shared settlement in Prairie Valley, combining her land with adjacent territory held by Standing Bear's people, building a community where settlers and tribal members work together, sharing water, sharing resources, sharing governance. It's never been done before, she admitted, at least not successfully. But we just took down the most powerful man in the territory by working together. If we can do that, maybe we can build something too. When she finished, Raven Wolf was quiet for a long time. Then he said, My grandfather will want to negotiate. He won't just hand over control. I'm not asking him to. I'm suggesting equal partnership, shared decision-making, a new model. Settlers don't share power with us, they take it. This settler does, because I've seen what happens when people only take. When power is hoarded instead of shared, it destroys everything it touches. Alara met his eyes. I want to build something different, but I can't do it alone. Raven Wolf studied her face. You really mean this? I really mean this. Then talk to my grandfather, but be prepared. He's going to test you. Make sure you're serious. Make sure this isn't just another settler trick. It's not a trick. It's the only way forward that makes sense. Standing Bear did test her. Over the next month, he questioned every aspect of the proposal, poked holes in every argument, demanded guarantees and protections and safeguards. He brought in the tribal council, who were even more skeptical. Why should we trust you? One elder asked. Your people have broken every promise they've ever made to us. You shouldn't trust me based on promises, Alara said. You should trust me based on actions. Look at what we did together. Look at the women we freed, the empire we brought down. That wasn't me alone. That was all of us working together. I'm just suggesting we formalize it, make it permanent. And if it fails, if settlers start pushing us out again, then we push back, together, with legal standing and shared resources. We're stronger together than we are apart. Crow proved that by trying so hard to keep us divided. The negotiations took weeks. They argued about water distribution, land use, governance structures, dispute resolution. Alara brought in Brennan to help draft legal documents. Standing Bear brought in tribal lawyers who specialized in treaty law. Slowly, painfully, they hammered out an agreement. The settlement would be called Prairie Valley Crossing. 50 families initially, 25 settler families, 25 tribal families. Shared access to water, with distribution managed by a council elected equally from both communities. Shared farmland, with traditional practices respected. A school that taught both English and Lakota. A trading post operated cooperatively. It's ambitious, Brennan said, reviewing the final documents. It's going to face resistance from both sides. But if you can make it work, it'll be revolutionary. The first families arrived in Prairie Valley in late spring. They came slowly, cautiously, each group watching the other for signs of betrayal or tricks. Alara had sold her father's cabin and used the money to build a communal meeting hall, neutral ground where both communities could gather. It was rough timber and simple construction, but it was solid. The first council meeting was tense. Settlers sat on one side, tribal members on the other, everyone armed and wary. This is never going to work, one settler muttered. It will if we make it work, Alara said firmly. She stood at the front of the hall with Standing Bear, both of them facing the assembled families. We're here because the old way, the way of taking and fighting and destroying, that way leads to people like Crow, leads to suffering and exploitation and empire built on bones. We're choosing a different path. It won't be easy. We're going to argue. We're going to disagree. But we're going to do it together as equals, and we're going to build something that lasts. Pretty words, a tribal elder said, but words are easy. Actions are hard. Then let's start with actions, Standing Bear said. The first water distribution is tomorrow. We allocate it together, according to need. Some fields need more water than others. Some families have more children. We figure it out together, fair and transparent. The next morning, Alara stood by the main irrigation channel with red sky, watching as families came to draw their allotted water. There were disputes. Of course there were disputes. A settler family accused a tribal family of taking more than their share. A tribal family complained that settlers' planting methods wasted water. But they worked it out, argued, negotiated, compromised. No one pulled a gun, no one burned anyone's crops. It was messy and imperfect and human. It was progress. Helen Marsh arrived in Prairie Valley that summer, bringing 12 women from her recovery network. They'd been freed from Crow's camps, had gone through months of healing, and were ready to try building new lives. We're calling it New Haven, Helen said, gesturing to a cluster of buildings on the edge of the settlement. A place for women who've survived trafficking. They can stay as long as they need, learn skills, heal. And when they're ready, they can join the settlement as full members or move on to wherever they want to go. That must have cost a fortune, Alara said. Crows seized assets, plus donations from people who read about the raids in the newspapers. Turns out a lot of people wanted to help once they knew help was possible. Helen smiled slightly. You started something bigger than you realized. Over the months that followed, more people came. Settlers who were tired of the violence and uncertainty of the frontier. Tribal members who'd been pushed out of their traditional territories. Women who'd survived Crow's camps and wanted to be part of building something better. Not everyone who came stayed. Some settlers couldn't adjust to sharing power. Some tribal members couldn't trust the settlers enough to make it work. There were failures and setbacks and moments when the whole experiment seemed ready to collapse. But enough people stayed. Enough people tried. By the following spring, Prairie Valley Crossing had grown to 80 families. They'd built a school where children learned in both English and Lakota. They'd established a trading post that did business with both settler towns and tribal territories. They'd created a dispute resolution system that drew on both territorial law and tribal traditions. It wasn't perfect. The water distribution system still led to arguments every summer. Some families left after conflicts they couldn't resolve. There were cultural misunderstandings and resentments that bubbled up periodically. But it worked. Imperfectly, messily, but it worked. Alara stood on a hill overlooking the settlement one evening, watching smoke rise from chimneys, listening to the mixed sounds of English and Lakota conversations, children playing, dogs barking, life happening. Raven Wolf climbed the hill to join her, moving slowly. He'd recovered from his wound, but he was still building back his strength. "You did it," he said. "We did it. All of us. Your father would be proud." Alara thought about that, about her father's letter telling her to run, to start over, to not die for his mistakes. She'd ignored that advice, had fought instead of running, had nearly died multiple times. "I don't know if he'd be proud," she said, "but I hope he'd understand. I couldn't run, not when there were people who needed help, not when there was a chance to build something better." "Building something better is harder than burning something down," Raven Wolf said. "Crow took 3 weeks to destroy. This," he gestured at the settlement below, "this will take years, maybe generations, and there's no guarantee it'll last." "No, but it's worth trying." They stood in companionable silence, watching the sun set over Prairie Valley. In the distance, Alara could see Standing Bear walking with his granddaughter, Aida, both of them heading toward the communal hall. "She's doing better," Raven Wolf said, following Alara's gaze. "Still has nightmares. Still has days where she can't get out of bed. But she's healing." Helen says that's normal, that recovery isn't a straight line. Nothing worth doing is a straight line. A bell rang from the settlement below, the call for the evening meal, which was communal twice a week. Families gathered in the meeting hall, sharing food, sharing stories, building the small connections that held a community together. "We should go down," Alara said. "In a minute." Raven Wolf looked at her. "I never properly thanked you for filing that claim, for starting this whole thing, for saving Aida. You saved my life twice. We're even." I don't think that's how it works. Then we'll just have to keep saving each other until we figure out the math. Ravenwolf smiled, a real smile, the kind Alara hadn't seen since before he was wounded. Deal. They walked down the hill together as darkness settled over Prairie Valley. The meeting hall was warm and loud, packed with families speaking multiple languages, children running between tables, the smell of cooking mixing settler and tribal traditions. Standing Bear stood at the front, calling for attention. When the noise died down, he spoke in both Lakota and English, switching between languages naturally. 6 months ago, this place didn't exist. 6 months ago, most of us didn't trust each other. We had every reason not to trust each other. Generations of broken promises, violence, betrayal. But we tried anyway. And we're still here. He paused, looking around the room. We're not here because everything is perfect. We're here because we chose to be here, chose to try, chose to believe that maybe there's a better way to live than the way we were living before. Standing Bear's gaze settled on Alara. We're here because one young woman refused to accept that the world had to be the way it was. She could have run, could have sold the land and moved east and never looked back. Instead, she fought. And then she chose to share what she'd won. Alara felt her face heat. She wasn't comfortable with praise, with being singled out. This isn't about me, she said. This is about all of us. It's about all of us now, Standing Bear agreed. But it started with you. Don't diminish that. Margaret Frost stood up from where she sat with other women from New Haven. I want to say something. The room quieted. 8 months ago, I was taken from a stagecoach and imprisoned in a camp. I spent 3 months thinking I was going to die there, that no one was coming, that the world had forgotten about me. Margaret's voice shook slightly, but she kept going. Then one night people came. People who had no obligation to help me. People who risked their lives to free strangers. And after they freed us, they didn't just leave us to figure it out alone. They built this. A place where people who've been broken can put themselves back together. She looked at Alara. So when people say this is about all of us, they're right. But it's also true that some people start things. Some people light fires, and the rest of us are just trying to keep the light going. The room was silent for a moment. Then someone started clapping. Others joined in. Soon the whole hall was applauding, and Alara had to bite the inside of her cheek to keep from crying. When the noise died down, Helen stood up. I have an announcement. The territorial governor has officially recognized Prairie Valley Crossing as a chartered settlement. That means we have legal standing. We can own property collectively. We can make contracts. We can protect ourselves under law instead of just hoping the law protects us. More applause. This was huge. It meant the settlement wasn't just an experiment. It was legitimate, real. There's more, Helen continued. The federal government is investigating corruption throughout the territory. They're using evidence we provided to prosecute officials who enabled Crow's operations, and they're asking us to advise on policy reforms. They want to know how to prevent something like Crow's empire from happening again. Tell them to enforce the laws they already have, Red Sky called out, and stop letting rich men buy judges. Laughter rippled through the room. I'll pass that along, Helen said dryly. But they're also asking about our governance model here, about how we make shared decision-making work between different communities. There's talk of using Prairie Valley Crossing as a model for other settlements. The room erupted in conversation. The idea that their little experiment might influence policy across the territory was both exciting and terrifying. Standing Bear raised his hands for quiet. That's for the future. For tonight, we eat, we celebrate, we remember how far we've come. The meal was chaotic and joyful. Alira found herself sitting between Aida and a settler woman named Ruth, whose husband had been killed by Crow's men years ago. They talked about planting schedules, about the school curriculum, about whether the communal livestock should include goats. Normal things. Community things. It felt like healing. After the meal, as people were cleaning up and heading home, Thomas Brennan pulled Alara aside. I'm leaving tomorrow, heading back to Denver with Sarah. How is she? Better. Not good, but better. The doctors think she might recover enough to live independently eventually, but it's going to take time. He paused. I wanted to thank you before I left. You gave me my daughter back. That's not something I can ever repay. You already repaid it. You used your skills to help bring down Crow's network. You drafted the legal framework for this settlement. You gave us the tools to build something lasting. Tools are just tools. You're the ones using them. Brennan handed her a document. This is the final incorporation papers for Prairie Valley Crossing. Everything official, everything legal. Guard it carefully. Alara took the papers, feeling their weight. We will. One more thing. Brennan's expression turned serious. The federal investigation is going to uncover some ugly truths. Officials who took bribes, judges who looked the other way, sheriffs who actively helped Crow's operations. There are going to be trials. High-profile trials. You'll likely be called to testify again. I can handle it. I know you can, but be prepared for backlash. For people to say you destroyed lives, ruined careers, that you went too far. They can say whatever they want. The truth is the truth. The truth is complicated. Some of the officials who took Crow's money had families to feed. Some of them convinced themselves they were doing the best they could in a bad system. They're still guilty, but they're also human. Brennan looked at her steadily. Don't lose sight of that complexity. Don't become so focused on justice that you forget about mercy. Crow didn't show mercy. No. But you're not Crow. That's the whole point. After Brennan left, Alara walked through the settlement, thinking about his words. She passed New Haven, where lights still burned as women worked on various projects. Sewing, woodworking, learning to read. She passed the school, dark now but with children's drawings visible through the windows. She passed family homes where people were settling in for the night. All of this had come from one decision. One moment where she could have run but chose to fight. One land claim that had seemed like such a small thing at the time. She thought about all the people who'd died. Her father. The women in the camps they'd reached too late. Warriors who'd fallen in the raids. Crow's men who'd been killed in the fighting. So much death to get to this fragile peace. Was it worth it? Alara didn't know. Couldn't know. The people who died couldn't tell her if they thought the cost was justified. All she could do was try to make sure their deaths meant something, try to build something that lasted. She found herself at the small cemetery on the edge of the settlement. Her father was buried here, along with 3 warriors who'd fallen in the final raid and 2 women who'd died from injuries sustained in Crow's camps before they could be freed. Alara knelt by her father's grave. Someone, probably Helen, had planted wildflowers around the marker. I didn't run, she said quietly. I know you told me to, but I couldn't. There were too many people who needed help. Too much wrong that needed fixing. She paused. I hope you understand. I hope you'd see what we built here and think it was worth it. The wind rustled through the grass. No answers came, but Alara hadn't really expected any. The dead didn't give guidance. They just left the living to figure things out. She stayed there for a while, thinking about inheritance. Her father had left her land, yes. But more than that, he'd left her the belief that things could be different, that treaties should be honored, that people deserved to be treated as people. That was the real inheritance. Not 1,200 acres, but an idea. And ideas, Alara was learning, were harder to kill than men. The following weeks brought change. The federal trials began, exposing the depth of Crow's corruption. 3 judges were removed from office. A territorial official was sentenced to prison. Sheriff Tate disappeared before he could be arrested, probably fled the territory entirely. The newspapers covered it all extensively. Prairie Valley Crossing became famous, the settlement built on the ruins of Crow's empire, the experiment and cooperation between settlers and tribal communities. People came to see it. Some were curious, some were skeptical. Some came looking for hope. A delegation of tribal leaders from 3 different nations visited, wanting to understand how the governance model worked. A group of settlers from Montana came looking for advice on negotiating treaties with their neighboring tribes. A federal official came to study their water management system. We're not special, Alara told each group. We're just people trying to do better than the generation before us. Sometimes we succeed, sometimes we fail, but we keep trying. Red Sky started training programs teaching both settlers and tribal members defensive tactics, survival skills, conflict resolution through mediation rather than violence. She was tough on everyone equally, which somehow made it fair. I'm teaching you how to protect what you've built, she told a mixed group of trainees. But I'm also teaching you when not to fight, when to talk instead of shoot, when to compromise instead of dominate. That's a different kind of strength, one young settler said. It's the hardest kind. Red Sky agreed. Aida opened a small workshop where she taught traditional craftwork alongside more modern trades. Women who'd survived crows' camps often found the work therapeutic, something to do with their hands while their minds healed. "I'm not the same person I was before they took me," Aida told Alara one afternoon as they worked on repairing a fence. "Part of me died in that camp, but I'm building a new version of myself, someone who survived, someone who knows how strong she really is." "You're one of the strongest people I know." Strength isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's moving forward despite them. Aida paused in her work. "You taught me that. The way you kept going even when you were terrified, even when everything seemed impossible. I was just doing what needed to be done. That's what strength is, doing what needs to be done even when you're scared." That summer, the settlement held its first harvest festival. Families from both communities contributed food, music, and stories. There was still separation. People naturally gravitated toward those most similar to them, but there was also mixing. Settler children played with tribal children. Adults shared meals and conversations. Old barriers were starting to crack. Standing Bear and Alara stood together watching the festivities, both of them tired but satisfied. "Your grandfather would be proud," Standing Bear said. "This settlement, this dream, it's what he hoped for when the first treaties were signed. Cooperation instead of conquest." "Do you think it'll last?" Alara asked. "After we're gone?" "I think it'll last as long as people choose to make it last, as long as each generation decides the work is worth doing." Standing Bear looked at her. "That's all any legacy is. A choice the next generation makes about whether to continue what you started. That's terrifying. That's freedom. We can't control what happens after we're gone. We can only build something worth continuing and hope the people who come after us see the value in it." As autumn approached, Raven Wolf announced he was leaving. "Not forever," he said, sitting with Alara by the river. "But I need to travel. Need to visit the other settlements, see what else is happening in the territory. Make sure Crow's network is really broken, not just hiding. When will you be back?" "Spring, maybe summer." He looked at her. "Will you be here?" "Where else would I go?" "Anywhere. You're free now. Crow's dead. The land is legally yours. You could sell it, move to a city, start over somewhere easier." Alara thought about that. She could leave, could take her money and her freedom and go somewhere no one knew her story, somewhere without the weight of history and responsibility. "I could," she agreed, "but I won't. This place, what we're building, it matters. It's messy and hard and frustrating, but it matters. I'm not done with it yet." Raven Wolf smiled. "Good, because I don't think it's done with you either." He left the next morning with Red Sky and 2 warriors, heading north to check on tribal territories and make sure no one was trying to rebuild Crow's operations under a new name. Alara watched them go, feeling the strange mix of loss and pride. She'd miss Raven Wolf, but she understood the need to keep moving, keep fighting. Crow was dead, but the systems that had enabled him were still there. Someone needed to watch for the next Victor Crow, the next person who'd try to build an empire on suffering. That winter was hard. The settlement faced its first real test when food stores ran low and water froze in the irrigation channels. There were arguments about distribution, accusations of hoarding, threats to leave. Alara and Standing Bear called an emergency council meeting. "We're going to get through this," Alara said firmly. "We knew winter would be hard. We planned for it. But plans only work if we follow them. That means equal distribution, even when we're hungry. That means helping families who are struggling, even when we're struggling ourselves. That means trusting each other, even when it's hard." "Easy to say when you're not watching your children go hungry," one settler father said bitterly. "My children are as hungry as yours," a tribal mother shot back. "We're all in this together." They made it through, but barely. By the time spring arrived, they'd lost 3 families who left for settlements with easier access to supplies. The remaining families were leaner, harder, more committed. "The ones who stayed are the ones who really believe," Helen observed. "The ones who'll make this work long-term." When Raven Wolf returned in late spring, he brought news. 2 more cooperative settlements had formed in other territories, inspired by Prairie Valley Crossing. They were smaller, newer, more fragile, but they existed. "The idea is spreading," he said. "People are tired of the old way, tired of fighting over scraps. They want to try building something together." "That's good," Alara said. But it's also dangerous. Powerful people won't like it. They profit from division. Let them be unhappy. We're not asking their permission. That summer, a delegation from the territorial government visited Prairie Valley Crossing. They wanted to propose an official recognition, making the settlement a model for future development, providing financial support, sending observers to document the governance system. What do they want in return? Standing Bear asked suspiciously. The lead official, a earnest young man named Porter, didn't sugarcoat it. They want credit. They want to be able to say they supported this innovative approach to settler-tribal relations. They want it to reflect well on the current administration. So they want to take credit for something they fought against until we proved it could work, Alara said flatly. Yes, Porter admitted, but they're also offering genuine support, money for infrastructure, legal protection, recognition that could help similar settlements get started elsewhere. He paused. I know it's not perfect. I know the politics are messy. But if you say yes, you could help dozens of other communities avoid the fights you had to win. Isn't that worth swallowing some pride? Alara and Standing Bear discussed it with the council for 3 days. The arguments were fierce. Some people wanted nothing to do with a government that had enabled Crow's operations for years. Others saw the practical benefits. In the end, they voted to accept the support with conditions. The government couldn't interfere with their governance, couldn't use the settlement for propaganda without permission, and had to commit to investigating and prosecuting future cases of corruption and trafficking. Porter agreed to all of it. You drive a hard bargain, he said. We learned from experience, Alara replied. 2 years after Crow's death, Prairie Valley Crossing had grown to 130 families. They'd built a proper school, a medical clinic, a trading post that did business across 3 territories. They'd survived 2 harsh winters, a drought, and multiple political challenges. Helen's Recovery Center had helped 47 women rebuild their lives. Some stayed in the settlement. Others moved on to new places, carrying with them the knowledge that survival was possible, that healing, however slow and imperfect, was real. The federal investigation into Crow's network concluded with 17 convictions, asset seizures totaling over $100,000, and policy reforms aimed at preventing similar operations. It wasn't perfect. Some guilty people escaped justice, some evidence disappeared mysteriously, but it was real change. Alara stood on the same hill where she'd stood so many times before, watching the settlement spread out below. But this time she wasn't alone. Raven Wolf stood beside her, and Standing Bear and Aida and Helen and dozens of others who'd become family over the months and years. You did it, Helen said. You actually did it. We did it, Alara corrected. All of us. What now? Aida asked. What's the next fight? There'll always be another fight, Standing Bear said. More people who want to exploit others, more systems that need changing, more work to be done. But tonight, Raven Wolf said, tonight, we can just appreciate what we've built. They stood together as the sun set over Prairie Valley, watching smoke rise from chimneys, listening to the sounds of life and community and hope. Alara thought about her father's letter one last time. Don't die for land. Don't die for my mistakes. She hadn't died, but she'd come close, had bled and fought and nearly lost everything. Was it worth it? She looked at the settlement below, at the children playing in the common area, speaking both English and Lakota without thinking about it, at the families working together on shared projects, at the women from New Haven laughing as they worked in the gardens, building new lives from the wreckage of old ones. Yeah, it was worth it. The land had never been the point. It had been a tool, a lever to shift power, a foundation to build on. What mattered was what they'd built with it, a community that chose cooperation over conquest, a place where broken people could heal, a model that showed another way was possible. It wasn't perfect, would never be perfect. There were still arguments, still resentments, still people who left because they couldn't make it work. But it was real. And it was growing. And that, Alara thought, was enough. She'd spent her whole life being told that some things just were the way they were. That power flowed in certain directions and trying to change it was pointless. That the strong took and the weak suffered, and that's just how the world worked. But standing here, watching a sunset over a settlement that shouldn't exist by all the rules of the old world, Alara knew the truth. The world was exactly what people chose to make it. No more, no less. Her father had given her land and water rights, but he'd also given her something more important, the stubborn belief that wrong was still wrong even when everyone else accepted it, that standing up mattered even when you were alone, that one person refusing to accept the world as it was could start ripples that changed everything. She hadn't saved everyone, hadn't fixed every problem, hadn't created paradise, but she'd proven that change was possible, that people from different worlds could work together if they chose to, that empires built on suffering could be torn down and replaced with something better. That was her real inheritance, not land, but proof. Proof that one person standing up could matter. Proof that another way was possible. Proof that the world didn't have to stay broken just because it had always been broken. As darkness fell over Prairie Valley Crossing, Alara felt something she hadn't felt since before her father died. Peace. Not the peace of everything being perfect, but the peace of knowing you'd done something that mattered, that you'd left the world a little better than you found it. That would have to be enough. And somehow, standing here with people who'd become family, watching life unfold in the settlement they'd built together from nothing but hope and stubbornness and the refusal to accept that suffering was inevitable, it was more than enough. It was everything.